Hey guys, what's up? Just got finished with a dev interview with Dovagedys from Riot, and well, I don't need much of an intro for this video, but I just wanted to say it went super well, and if you're interested in like particular topics, you can, skip through the video. I have everything labeled, but, enjoy. And it wasn't really organized. I didn't really go in any particular order or anything necessarily like that. But he was able to provide a lot of really cool and interesting insight over a lot of things that, we as a community have been kind of like asking about for a while. So enjoy. Hello?
Hello.
Oh, hey. How's, let me just, I think that's a good volume. All right, say something.
Something.
All right, let me just.
All right, I'll keep talking so you
That's
can gauge if it's
perfect.
okay or not okay.
That's nice. That's great. All right, I think that should be a good level. Man, that's honestly. I don't know if you wouldn't happen to be reading chat right now, would you?
I'm not, but I can be. Hold on, let me open it. I'll have to mute it though, because it'll be delayed
It's
and
they're
weird.
mostly just commenting on the like very buttery quality of your voice. And
Oh, I see. I don't
to
need
be,
to read that, but I appreciate it.
yeah. All right. Great start, guys. Well done, guys. So yeah. So I guess I should kind of like, set the stage for this whole thing. This is Travis how do you pronounce your last name?
Bozy.
Travis Bosey, aka Dovagedys. Am I getting that one right?
Sure, it's a made-up word, so you can say it however you want.
Travis Bosey, aka Riot Dovagedys, who is a producer, I believe, on the Legends of Runeterra team, and pretty experienced Magic the Gathering player, as I've been told.
Yeah, I went pretty hard on Magic for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, which doesn't sound that long, but I took it pretty seriously.
Oh yeah.
Played in a lot of tournaments, acquired some pro points, had a lot of fun with it, met a lot of awesome people. It's a great game with a great community for sure.
All right. And yeah, I wanted to basically, just kind of like chat about game stuff right now. So just so everyone's aware, the kind of like general nature of this conversation. I wanted to keep it to the kind of like balance philosophy, like metrics for buffs and nerfs, like that kind of thing, or like what are the good metrics for a good meta, stuff like that, just like the general philosophy kind of stuff. So just so everyone's on the same page, we're not going to be talking about like super specific things. I mean, Dovagedys or Travis, I don't really, I don't know what it is. I'm okay. Here's the thing. I guess I'm weird. I'm like too much of a gamer. I don't really do a lot of like in-person interactions. It always feels weird for me to use like, real names. Are you like either way or
Yeah, man, I'm a gamer too.
all
So,
right.
if I could think of you as Swim, I don't think of you
Yeah,
as your real
yeah,
name.
there it
So,
is. Yeah.
yeah, you can think of me as Dovagedis, totally
So
cool.
Dovagedys, he might be able to, comment or hint towards some specifics in some cases, but for the most part, this is just going to be about like, the broad picture of things, which to me personally is kind of definitely the preferred way to do it, just because I think that's kind of the most important stuff. I think for some people, they want just like the immediate, like the answers or the leaks, but I think this stuff is actually quite a bit more important, especially long term. All right.
Cool.
So I think I'm just gonna honestly I don't have this very structured at all. I'm not a very structured guy. So
That's okay, man. We're just talking.
yeah, we're just talking. We're just talking. And I guess I wanted to ask what specific metrics you guys have for what's a good place to start? I was thinking like maybe like some of the specific champions, because I believe, and I'm just going by like the blog post stuff, the lines of communications we've had in the past. A while ago, a quite long time ago, like one of the earlier ones that we got, so like a year ago, was saying something along the lines of we want to make sure like all champions are like viable or to a certain point. And it feels like at least within like community perception, some of them have like either like fallen short of that or like been short of that? Like what are the specific like metrics that you guys use for determining like, you know, viability or like whether something is in need of a change or not?
Good question. So before I answer it, though, I think that it's important to understand that the metrics really lead to a greater goal, and the
Yeah.
goal is to make sure that the game is fun, right? Like if we are too focused on metrics, like if we had a metric that was like every deck needs a 50% win rate, I actually think a game where every deck has a 50% win rate is very unfun,
100%.
and players wouldn't have fun with that. So the goal ultimately is to make the game fun. And to keep people, excited to play. So about our specific metrics, there's a couple that are easy to measure, and there are a couple that are not easy to measure. And one of the ones that is not necessarily easy to measure, you mentioned, which is like we want every champion to feel like it has a deck that it belongs in, that it's the best. So like, Katarina has become kind of a meme lately, which is a little bit sad. And one of the reasons I think that is that there's no deck that she's best in. And so even if the deck that the champion is best in isn't S tier or A tier, if they have a deck they're best in, then that's still okay with us. So I think like an example would be like Lux right now, where like as far as I know, there's no deck that's like extremely competitive that has Lux in it, but there are one or two decks where she definitely is the best champion choice if you're trying to do a certain thing, right? And Katarina doesn't have that right now, but that's hard to measure. That's like, it's hard for us to like figure that out, and it changes over time. It changes with every patch. As far as like the specific metrics, there are metrics we use, like win rate of decks, not necessarily specific champions. I know that, a lot of it is easy to shortcut and be like, this champion has X win rate, but we don't really think about it that way. We think about like decks as in an aggregate win rate. So like there are Twisted Fate decks that have 56% win rate or 57% win rate right now, but Twisted Fate overall, if you look at all of his play rate over all decks, is actually below 50%. So we don't really think about it as like the champion's win rate. We also look at like region's play rate. So there's a very good example right now in our game with Ionia, where Ionia is falling below the metrics because the cards within the Ionia region just aren't played enough. They don't exist in the meta enough. So I think those are the main ones we think about a lot. There are other ones, but they all kind of work together to paint a picture. Unless something becomes like an emergency level, which we do have emergency levels, like if something's win rate became too high, where we would live redeploy, which would be like a hot fix immediately. We wouldn't wait for a patch. We do have metrics like that, but we've never had a card reach that level, so players haven't seen us pull that lever yet. Mostly when we do live patches, it's because something doesn't work. An example that some players might remember is when Sejuani was new. Her level up was inconsistent, and her level 2 would work inconsistently. We fixed that immediately. We didn't want to wait for a scheduled patch to fix that. Did I answer your question?
Sure no, that was good. I remember Zephyr Sage also got hotfixed as well. I think that was like a different like bug basically,
exactly.
Or unintended interaction, I guess. I mean, if we find things like that where cards don't work, and because they're not working correctly, it's warping the meta, that is when we will take immediate action. Right.
Usually, like the Zephyr Sage example or the Sejuani example.
And so I really want to like clarify, because I love how you explain that, and I want to clarify for everyone in chat. This like metrics are everything. Like there's so many different lenses at which you can look through, like, the state of the meta. There's so many different like ways you can break that down. Like, the simple ones being like, like across all ladder, or like only skewed towards higher level play. But it gets so much more complicated than that, because you have to balance, like, you might want to balance regions, you might want to balance archetypes, you might want to balance champions. There's a lot of metrics. Okay, so actually let me kind of finish. Like I also want to get into this deeper by kind of transitioning this into another point, and this is one of the most topical ones. TF is right. Part of the reason we're having this conversation is you mentioned in chat that TF has what was it, like you were saying, like a low play rate across all ladder?
Oh, you mean when we were talking in your chat?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he definitely, it doesn't, that deck does not have a low play rate.
Yeah,
it definitely has a high play rate,
but not as high as everyone was exaggerating.
Yeah, I think that I have seen a lot of whirlwind in social media around this deck, rightfully so, because it is a sharp play experience. We understand that. But like, you know, there have been decks in our game previously that have had much higher play rates than Twisted Fate and Fizz. I can't remember the specific deck, but I remember like visually seeing like we've had decks that have had 18, 19% play rate before, whereas like TF Fizz is around 10 or 11. Which is still, you know, in the yellow zone. I wouldn't say that's very healthy. I don't think it's unhealthy. But as I think you're leading up to, it kind of depends on where you're playing on the ladder. I just kind of a sidebar, sorry, is like something we value and we think is important is making decks for different kind of players. And one of the kind of players we want to make decks for are the players who enjoy skill intensive decks, where like, you know, the better you play, the more control you have over the outcome of the game, right?
Yep.
Not every deck can have that, as you know. You're really skilled, so you understand. But for the people listening, not every deck has that. Some decks are more straightforward. Twisted Fate Fizz is one of those decks where the better you play, even in the mirror, the better player has a much higher chance to win because it is a very skill-intensive deck. So thinking about it that way, I think of it as a success because it is doing that thing very well. Unfortunately, it's probably doing it too well. And so when you see tournaments or you see in high-level masters play where everyone is skilled, wants to have as much advantage as they can get, they are playing that deck because it is the most skill-expressive deck we have right now. And if you look at the top, the percentage of total meta is much higher. So whereas if you go lower, like platinum or below, the play rate starts to go down, which is bringing the overall play rate down. And so I think that's what you're about to ask me about, the overall play rate. Did I answer your question?
No, absolutely. So that's definitely 100% true. I agree with basically everything, and that's something that I try to explain a lot because a lot of people ask me, you know, oh, should I don't know what's a good example. People asking me about like certain cards getting buffed, you know, like, oh, you know, I want Katarina buffed or I want Anivia buffed, and to a large degree, usually you want the, you know, the higher skill expressive things to be the stronger ones. And you guys have definitely done a good job at doing that. In particular, I mean, I noticed when I was doing the last seasonal tournament, the decks were all very high skilled, like, you know, TF is as well as, you know, the Aphelios decks. There was a very like high command for, you know, players to be able to, you know, execute the strategies and outplay. Where I was getting to, though, was like just the kind of like broad diversity of metrics that can be applied to sort of the idea of like problem detecting as well as problem identifying, which I would clarify as two different things. But I was thinking like, you know, so those metrics, I 100% agree with you. The idea of, you know, it doesn't have as high of a play rate as, you know, some other decks in the past. But I guess the disconnect is a large part of the community response, you know, the social media whirlwind, as it were, from my perspective, seems to come from a lot of other metrics, stuff like, which I don't have full data on, but stuff like counter ability, duration that it's been on ladder. In this case, TF has been on ladder for a while, but TF plus X has been on ladder for a very long time, right? Other metrics like polarization of matchups, as well as like polarization of game states is a big metric, being while TF is skill expressive in terms of the agency that you're able to output in your game, there's still a lot of like polarized game states, which is, you know, if they draw TF pick a card rummage, basically that's a really, really, really difficult hand to beat, and it's very easy for them to draw with their draw, right? And of course, polarization of game states as a metric is stuff we can observe in Fiora decks as well, that people also have a bit of an aversion to currently.
Absolutely. I think we do. I didn't mention it when you asked your question about metrics before, but we do think about the sharpness of matchups a lot. We think about like not just the sharpness of certain matchups, but how does it win? How does it feel when a player is winning with this strategy, and how does it feel when a player is losing to this strategy? I mean, for the record, we are aligned that TF has been too good for too long. There is a lot of power in his level 2.
Oh yeah.
And with the addition of stress testing, it has probably become too easy to level him up too consistently, to have so much power in his level 2, right? So I think we all agree on that. And as you're calling out, he has been strong for a long time, but the consistency uh, hasn't been as high as it has been recently. Like,
Definitely.
you know, when TF first came out, he was still just as, he was. We haven't changed him. He was just as strong. It just was just harder to level him so consistently. You know.
Mhm.
So we're totally. I totally agree with what you're saying. I don't know if you asked me a question. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just, I'm bad at doing these Q and A's because I don't end things in questions. I guess what I was thinking was, I mean, like, it's so hard, right? Because you and me are talking, and the whole point is, it just everything depends on the metric, right? The thing that I want to get to is like one of the big metrics for me, as well as a large portion of the community, is this metric of effective duration. And I think that this is actually I mean, in game design, one of the common things is just being aware that players, I think, aren't necessarily good at identifying problems as well as detecting them, right? Like, player unease is a very real phenomenon and effectively indismissible, but the idea of being able to identify exactly like what's causing that, I think, is something that players don't do very well. In particular, I think in a lot of cases, what I've noticed over a very long period of time, and something that's generally true in game design, is that when something's just been around for a long time, it just like it adds a lot to player disinterest, or what do you even call it? Just like not having fun, right? And
Not being satisfied with
yeah,
their
so
satisfaction. Yeah.
as a metric, I think the biggest one that I'm curious on your guys' radar is this idea of like duration. How long has something been the case for across different metas, right? Like, for example, Fiora Shen has been a pretty high tier. Maybe it hasn't been the most high play rate deck at any specific point in time, but across the last probably 8 months, I mean a very long time, it's been extremely prolific, and it's never out of fashion, to the point where as of now people are kind of like at the point where it's like, they might want a bit of a shift. They've been seeing it for 8 months. How much is that a metric for you guys? And that
It
yeah,
it
sorry.
absolutely is. No, it absolutely is.
Okay.
It's a great call out and something we care about a lot. So we don't have a specific metric where it's like a number
Yeah.
that we're trying to design around, but it definitely is a thing we care about a great deal, and we think about it and talk about it a lot. So it's complicated though, because there are things that we don't know how fast or if ever players will find a thing we know is powerful,
Mm.
which can impact how long we let it exist in the game, right? So, my favorite example is some people who played in the beta and the beginning of the launch of the game might remember that Draven used to be a 4/3, and
Yes.
and internally, we knew that he was literally the strongest champion in the game,
Mm.
but he wasn't being played a lot in the beta, almost none. He was very low presence during the beta. And then as more and more players started to figure it out, we ended up having to nerf him, even though for a long time we knew he was the strongest champion in our game by a
Yeah.
lot. Like how 5/3 quick strike for 4 mana or for 3 mana is just not okay. That, like, if we made that card today, people would, they would lose their mind day one, right? But
Yeah.
he
Oh,
existed for
absolutely.
months. So we do care and think about it, but it is complicated because we don't want to pre-nerf things, even though we know they're strong. We want players to find them and discover them, and we don't know how long it will take for the community to find them and discover them. So that's
Mhm.
one piece of it. And so to your specific point about, like, Fiora has been strong for a while, TF has been strong for a while, true. But in those two cases, players have kind of known about Fiora, but they slept on TF for a long time. He's been strong for a while, and people were sleeping on him until, like, I would say the last 2 or 3 months, and then he's become big time. I think that's okay. I think that maybe 3 months is too long. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure what the actual duration of okayness is, but
Mhm.
what I would like to see in our game over time is to have each champion have its time in the sun, its time at the top. Like right now,
Yeah.
Vladimir, for the first time in our game, is like a meta deck. It's the first time he's been in like a real meta deck where you're not a, you can play Vladimir and have a very high win rate.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's awesome. So that will probably change over time, and then a new champion will have its time in the sun. Like in the beta, since we were talking about Draven, Heimerdinger was played a lot, Hecarim was played a lot, but you don't see those champions today. And so having this kind of I think one of the beautiful things about our game, and being, you know, having this acceptance of like, we're going to change cards, we're going to do live balance, which isn't something necessarily other card games do.
Yeah.
It hopefully lets us have a rotating system where it's like each champion will at some point have its time of being like, yo, this champion is bananas. It's like too strong right now, but not for too long, because what you're calling out, like for TF, it has been too long. I agree with that. Like when the community calls that out, I agree with you. A lot of people in our game agree with you. And so then we do a lot of work to figure out like, A, how did this happen and how do we not do it again? And then B, like it helps us calibrate with the community. What is too long? Is 1 month too long? Is 2 months too long? Is 3 months too long? And it's tricky because like, one, we have to figure out how many players are doing it, how much visibility does this thing have for being powerful, and then two, will the meta shift to adapt to it? There, like in the past, there have been metas where something has been too strong, but smart players like you and others have figured out ways to beat it, and then the meta has changed, and that is good. We want that thing to be happening when it can. Unfortunately, Twisted Fate doesn't really have a predator. Like that, the TF Fizz deck right now doesn't have a predator, and so you all the people in the community have tried really hard to beat it, and you haven't been able to. That to us is a strong signal that something is wrong.
Yeah.
Right. But it takes time to learn that. It takes time for it to have all of you, going in the lab trying to figure out how to beat these strategies.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think just to clarify, like one thing you were saying before, because I mean, there's a few people in chat that are pointing out that TF has been strong for more than 2 or 3 months. But to clarify, I believe, and I'm correct me if I'm mistaken, but you mean specifically, you want to wait for a champion to sort of realize their full potential, right? Which is to say, like, you guys knew TF would be like really, really powerful, like similar to Draven even, and it has been kind of like a slow creep getting there, because people are putting out like, even like Go Hard TF was like, very, very dominant on ladder. It had like, a higher play rate than win rate at the time, but it was just like insanely played for, and that was, God, I'm really good with time, but that was a number of months ago, I think.
Totally. So, the Go Hard came out near the end of last year. So now we're talking about 4 or 5 months of TF being strong. And I hear that. And I'm definitely not counterpointing the community's perspective there. The thing that I think that is important to understand is that I think the problem with that deck was Go Hard, which is why that's the card we changed. We didn't change TF. And I think the thing that has finally made us finally push TF over the edge is stress testing more than anything else, because now it is too consistent. When we added the Lunar Celebration cards with Aphelios, it is now just too easy to level him up. In the Go Hard days, you still had that turn 5 TF level 2 sometimes when you had the right 3 cards in your hand.
Yeah.
But now now you need 3 of 5 cards instead of the exact 3 cards, which makes it much more consistent and much more powerful. And so to clarify the number of months that TF has been strong, it's important to remember that if you generalize it with just the champion, we don't do that. We think about the deck. We think about the deck that's a problem. So I think that might be one of the communication. Maybe we can communicate that more clearly.
No, that makes sense.
With the community in our our patch notes or whatever, because it is very easy to boil it down to this champion has been strong for a long time, but we don't think about it that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely a good perspective. And that's the thing, like I really wanted to kind of like set the stage in the first bit of this talking about all the different metrics you can use, because metrics are literally everything. And it's really important to make sure we're clarifying what's important to you guys, and if anything, maybe if to be able to better communicate as a community to the developer team. Not only do we have to understand what's important to you guys, but then we need to express what we think what metrics we think might be underlooked, right? That's kind of how the conversation should end up boiling down. And I guess in this case, probably the only thing is that it's like, and that's the struggle, because you have to juggle like the different decks, but they're both using like the same like Bilgewater package, right? So they're not the same deck, but they do have some similarities. And a lot of, you know, the community outcry has been from people that have been kind of like mostly just feeling like they've been playing against the same package in different flavors for a while.
Absolutely.
It is a little bit different, so it has some differences, but it has some degree of similarities, and that's what's really hard to juggle about it. Yeah.
That's totally true. And another thing we think about, I didn't call it out, but I think it is important, is that we feel like we're making this game with you all, with the community. We try our best to listen to the community. We do a bunch of survey work where we ask questions in game after you finish a game. Maybe some of your viewers have seen this stream or have seen this question, or maybe you have, where it's like you'll get a question about like, hey, the deck you just played against, and then ask you questions about it. Like, was it frustrating to play against it? Like, how do you feel about it? Do you think it's too strong? Do you think it's too weak? So like, we do try to learn as much as we can, because there are times when we make changes to cards simply because the community is tired of them, or they feel too sharp. My favorite example is Ezreal. Like, he was another skill intensive champion, had a lot of power in his level 2, but his win rate was, I don't think, ever too high. But we eventually changed him, because losing to him, going from 20 to 0, made too many people upset.
100%.
Felt too sharp.
It's almost never the win rate, as you know. It's like the win rate is like, it's sometimes the win rate, and like sometimes that's a secondary or tertiary factor. But I mean, for the most part, you know, it's a lot about psychology. It's a lot about, as you say, things feeling too sharp, or, you know, like a lot of different metrics, right? Like counterability, polarization, that kind of thing. And a lot of the things that have seen the most outcry have been fairly low win rate, all things considered. Play rate ends up being a more accurate metric than win rate, but is still very incomplete, right?
Totally agree. Like you called out Fiora, how she's been perennially strong for a while, and that has been true, but her play rate until recently has been quite low. So we haven't really, to us, we've been like, okay, yeah, she's strong right now, but not a lot of people are playing her, so maybe that's okay for a little while. But although recently, I would say over like the last month, her play rate has increased a lot, and so, you know, now she's on our radar.
Yeah. All right, so something that I've also been kind of like talking about, because, you know, I try to keep an eye on like what people are talking about, complaining about, you know, in many cases, you know, that kind of thing. And something that people have noticed recently, and I don't know if there's any like, you know, specific cause for this, but there feels like there's been a lower degree of communication in the past like couple of months. That have, maybe there just hasn't been like a dev podcast, you know, one of the, I guess they do, God, what are those called that Jeff and
Dev
Andrew
blog?
do? Yeah, the dev blogs.
I don't know what those are called. Those are just fun things that our team tries to do, like with Jeff and Andrew. I don't know if they have a name.
They end up being, they're sort of like semi roadmappy, you know, they usually give like some insight as to like how things are going. But it does feel like, I mean, as a member of the community, you know, speaking for at least most people, it feels like that level of communication has fallen off, possibly coincidentally. I don't know if there's anything behind that, but a lot of the blog posts that used to like clarify more about like the design goals have felt like they were, you know, skipping that step of it. And, you know, those videos haven't come out in a little while. Is there, you know...
So I think that perception makes me a little sad, because as I mentioned a second ago, we care a lot about the community. We care a lot about communicating. And so if the community feels that way, then I think that's a signal that we should be doing more.
Yeah.
I can promise you there hasn't been like an intentional decision made where it's like we communicate less. That definitely hasn't happened. And I think that there is an element of, in the beginning, there's a lot of things we need to tell you. There's a lot of things we need to tell you about, like our design philosophy around RNG, our design philosophy around champions. But we don't want to necessarily repeat the same things over and over again. And so we run out of things to talk about. And so there might be an effect. I'm kind of just making this up, but there might be an effect over time where, because there's less for us to say, it feels like we are talking less to you. And that is a real thing we should consider. And maybe we should just be doing more of talking to the community. but I'm not sure what that looks like. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that we do want to bring more of the roadmappy stuff into the actual game, so we don't have to tweet it and do dev blogs. We want it like maybe some people have noticed we try to include in the game when you log in. It shows you, hey, these are the things coming up in the next 1 month or 2 months. We want to make it there to be less friction for players to know what's coming out like over the next year. But it takes time for us to build those things, you know.
Yeah,
And
that makes
and
sense.
maybe if we're doing it more in game, maybe then it does feel less personal. Maybe it does feel like we're talking with the community less. And I'm sad about that. I think that we should think about that and make sure that we're doing everything we can to be more as communicative as possible.
Yeah, no, I mean, I frequently see devs. I mean, such as, I mean, we're doing it right now. Like we're talking. You're agreeing to coming on and answering questions that me and members of the community have, and I see this across the board with like every Riot dev that I've seen is down for this. I wonder if like maybe some kind of like So, I mean, one of the things that I've seen a couple of games do is like a like consistently scheduled like weekly or bi-weekly like dev podcast where it's just like, here's, very kind of like breakdown where we're at on things, how we're feeling on things, that kind of thing. I think just like, I mean, transparency is really I think transparency is just, I mean, like I think everyone benefits from it, right? Just like, or like, I don't know. How would you feel about something like that?
So I agree that transparency is good for everyone, and I think we have a pretty strong history of being, as transparent as we can be. I think this is more about frequency than the actual transparency.
Yeah, that's a better word for it.
And so I mean, I like the idea of doing like a dev podcast. I think that sounds awesome. The real struggle there, and this is an answer that some people might not like, but it is a reality, is that like there are only so many hours in the day.
Of course.
So if we have, let's use Steve Rubin. Everybody loves Steve Rubin. If we have Steve Rubin doing a bi-weekly podcast that takes him 2 or 3 hours a week, those are 2 or 3 hours he's not spending doing design work. Right. And so we have to think about those trade-offs. Like I think that idea is awesome. And there's probably a future for something like that. We would just have to figure out like, how do we rotate the devs so that no one person is losing too much time, and not losing, but like trading off that time for other things. And then also, how do we keep the topics impactful enough that it satisfies players? Because like over time we might run out of things to talk about, and then it becomes like podcasts full of like fluffy stuff players don't care about, and then it's like, why are we doing it? So but I do think it's a good idea. All that said, I do think it's a cool idea. I do think that we could be doing more things like that, but I'm not making any promises.
Of course. Yeah. Just to clarify again, I mean, this is just Dovagedys. He's a producer, but he can't speak for the entire team. Like, he can't confirm anything like super specifically. He's just talking about like where the team's at.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can have the Legends of Runeterra team is kind of a magical place where a lot of people are involved in decisions we make, and so like I would never be so ridiculous to be like, we're gonna do this thing, and like say that to you and then tell the team we're gonna do this thing. I think that would be pretty toxic. And so it's more like, hey, Swim had an awesome idea. I would share it with the team, and then the team would try to build on it and like make it the best version they can make it.
Yeah. All right, let me see. What else was there? So, I mean, something that people have, been talking about recently, because I do want to focus more on like, I guess like topical things, and then as examples of the greater picture. But something people have mentioned recently was the lack of a balance patch like pre-stream. You said you don't like pre-nerfing stuff, and of course that makes a lot of sense. Was that? I think I heard, I don't know if this was like official, but someone was saying that it might have been because of the seasonal, okay, let me I'm having a words problem. So in pre-Targon, right before the Targon expansion launched, there was a patch that kind of like nerfed some of Bilgewater's cards. And it felt like a safety nerf. Like it felt like in some cases a bit of an over nerf, which I don't think is a bad thing in a case like that. Like because of the expansion cycle, you know, you need to make sure that the new expansion is fun, and that's a little rough because they're playing with like half the cards at first. So you might need to like make sure you like safety nerf some of the older things. And I think like something that happened with the stream launch, of course, is that, you know, there wasn't really like a safety nerf that came in before the stream launch, right? And some people were expecting that. What was the reason behind that? I think there was like a month that was effectively like skipped in terms of the balance patch cycle.
Good question. The answer, though, is complicated, and I think that like trying to answer it in front of all of your audience might make people unhappy. But I'm gonna try anyways because we,
Man.
you know, we're
Okay.
we're transparent. So I think.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, dude. It's a couple of different things. So as you said, we want new content when we release it to be exciting, and we don't want old content to be like the only thing that's viable when we make new content.
Yeah.
But we have to balance that between making sure that it's not like when Shurima comes out, that's all that's viable. We don't want that either. We want old content to be viable and new content to be viable together. We don't want players to feel like it's like you have to play Shurima or you can't succeed. I think that would be a failure.
Of course.
But we also don't want it to be like you can't play Shurima and succeed. That's also a failure, right? So it's a tough thing to balance. As far as like our patch cadence, our live balance patch cadence, we have a very specific cadence in our plan of like when we want to do things. Unfortunately, in the past, we have constantly made exceptions to that schedule, which has made it really hard for any player to know what the normal schedule looks like because we consistently make exceptions. And so then it's like, you know, if you're a player, then like what's the difference? So like the actual plan is for balance patches to happen once a month, which means when new content comes out, and then wait a month, and then no new content's coming out, but a live balance come out. So like for 2.3, they're like, this is what the normal schedule should look like. It's like 2.3 was Shurima. 2.5, which is coming up soon, balance patch. 2.7, next Shurima release. 2.9, you know, balance patch. That has been our schedule for a while, for like the last 6 or 7 months. Unfortunately, when we find a problem that we think needs to have, that can't wait that long, we make an exception, which makes it really hard for players to like understand the schedule. And so, you know, like when players call out like, hey, you used to do balance patches every 2 weeks, they're not I mean, in theory they are wrong, but practically they are not wrong because, right, we have made exceptions, and it makes it really hard to tell the difference between a patch and a balance patch. So to answer your question, so that's kind of like the philosophical answer. So to the practical answer of what you said for the tournaments, we don't specifically do balance patches for the tournaments because that, well, wait, let me back up. When we made our balance system and when we made our balance schedule, it was before seasonal tournaments existed, and then we tried to continue with our current plan after tournaments existed, and that doesn't work. And so really what that means is we need to come up with a new plan, which we are working with internally right now, of like, how do we balance? What should the balance schedule look like? Because we don't want to consistently feel the need to do a quote unquote emergency balance patch before a tournament. And also it makes it confusing because you can't understand when balance patches come. You can't understand, like, you know, how long are your cards going to be viable for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of walked in a circle around what you asked me, but I would say that in general, we don't want to have live balance patches to like quote unquote protect or fix a tournament that's upcoming. But we also don't want to have a tournament that's dominated by a single deck. Like, something I'm very proud of is in the first seasonal tournament, of the 4 winners across each of the 4 regions, of the 12 total decks that could have had, there were 10 different decks, which is pretty sick. I've never seen diversity like that in any card game ever.
That's was really amazing. Good.
But in the second seasonal tournament, we kind of saw the opposite of that, where almost everyone had at least some version of Twisted Fate in their lineup, right? And so that sucks. I think that's going to happen sometimes. There's not a lot we can do about it. It's going to happen occasionally. But if that was to happen every time, I would consider that a failure, right?
Yeah.
So now we're trying to come up with a new plan of like, how do we make all players on live that play in every game mode have a fair and balanced game that they can play and feel safe in the cards they want to play, but also keep the tournament structure, balanced as well. And we don't have a good answer for that. And so right now we're working on building an answer for that.
Yeah.
To answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess as soon as you guys have, an internal like patch structure figured out, I think this is actually a lot of what people have been really wondering in the community. Like this is kind of the perfect answer. Well, as far as you have the current information for, this is kind of like what we were all curious about, because as far as everyone was aware, like there was something shifting in how balance patches were going to be, cadenced, and how they were going to be structured. And, we saw that there was a departure from the norm in the past, like, couple of months for the seasonal. We weren't sure, how things were going to be changing. And presumably, I mean, as soon as you guys have some sort of internal idea of like what the new balance patch structure is going to be, there will be some kind of like dev announcement about that, and everyone will be on the same page. So that's perfect.
Absolutely. So to like try to give a one sentence wrap up, I would say that the things that players have seen recently in the last few months are not part of some plan. They are exceptions to the current plan, because the current plan wasn't working. And so when we come up with a new plan, which we haven't come up with yet, we will share that with everyone. We will share with everyone, and we will try to, hopefully it will be a good plan that meets all the needs, and then we will execute that plan accordingly and be more consistent, so that players have a better idea of like, this is the plan and we're following it, rather than like making all these exceptions all the time.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's literally, for me at least, like the number one thing that I was, concerned about right now, and that really alleviates that. And I mean, I guess you probably can't talk much about like what kinds of, patch structures you're discussing internally. I saw some people, but before I called you, some people were mentioning they liked like TFT's cadence of like an A patch and a B patch, which I'm personally not as familiar with, but
That's interesting, because I think I mean, different players want different things, but I think my understanding of the TFT patches is that they get new content every 4 months, whereas like in our game you get new content every 2 months. And the reason they have a B patch is because they don't want to go 4 months without players getting update to the game. So basically they get new content every 4 months, but then a B patch every 2 months between that. So there's a shakeup in the meta every 2 months, whereas like our plan is to affect the meta every 1 month. So if players are saying that we're not doing it fast enough and they want us to be like TFT, I'm not sure what that means, because TFT's cadence is slower than ours.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I personally can't. I don't know about TFT enough to comment, but that's very interesting. Okay.
I mean, if people are talking about the balance cadence for TFT, I think like I'm less connected to that. I used to love TFT and play it a ton. I haven't played it much this season, although I guess I played 50 hours a season. That's kind of a lot, but their patch, they don't necessarily have balance patches the way we do. They more fix things that are, I think the way I would categorize it, and I don't mean this negatively, is that when something is too powerful in TFT, it's much sharper than it is in our game, because you see it all the time.
Yep.
Like if Set is too strong in TFT, you see him every game, and so it feels way worse. And so when something is too good in TFT, they need to fix it right away, which isn't really the case in our game, because like if Fiora is too strong and she's only in 3% of games, well, that means 97% of the time players aren't feeling that she's too strong. So it's kind of different ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, something that I'm actually I want to ask you about this while we're talking about the idea of like patch cadence, because I have like a bit of like a personal, I guess, idea. I don't know if this like I'm sure there will be some kinds of flaws with this in some ways, but just out of curiosity, let's say like a toy example. Something that I was thinking about was the idea of basically balance patches being split into kind of like sort of diverged in forms of like patches that are more focused around like nerfs, specifically like nerfing singular cards, whereas like some patches more so being around like elevating like older archetypes or champions that aren't really seeing as much success. I guess my philosophy in this regard is like, I think that the singular buffs don't really end up going very far, because a lot of when people see the sort of like low functionality or like, you know, low popularity champions, you know, let's talk about, I guess, Lulu, Katarina, maybe Shyvana, Yasuo, possibly. I think what a lot of connects that isn't really necessarily a win rate per se, but more of like the ability to have and execute some kind of like functional game plan that like is coherent and feels good and, you know, makes sense. Because of course, you know, a lot of things don't come down to like the effective win rate, and a lot of decks will always have like 45 plus high win rates at like even the lowest ends possible. So what I'm thinking is, you know, would it be possible? Again, this is just a harebrained idea. I'm more looking for the flaws in this idea, but would it be possible to try to take, you know, some kinds of patches that are more focused on like nerfing or balancing the specific things that are, I guess, holding back or oppressing the meta, some sharp things as you mentioned, and then have patches that are dedicated towards singularly kind of like slightly tweaking or slightly reworking these sort of like archetypal packages. So let me give you an example. There could be like one patch which is effectively like a Katarina like rework slash tweak patch where her and like one or two cards gets changed to kind of like feel more in line, right? Which is something that I don't think is really going to be happening on its own without that, right?
So you kind of said a lot of things, and
Yeah.
I agree. I think I agree with what you're trying to say, but I'm not sure what you're asking me.
So do you think it would what would be the specific like problems, or would this work as an idea if you were to try to iteratively go through some of like the more flawed champions and have specific patches that were updating a bunch of cards that were kind of like, you know, empowering them or making them feel more more coherent, right? So Lulu might be the best example, because if you went to go through Lulu, if you I think Pix has been buffed once, and Warchefs went to a 2/2 as well, which, you know, is in part, I think, trying to make the Lulu archetype a little bit more viable. But I think like I guess I'm imagining like multiple changes happening at once, sort of like a patch that's kind of like designed or labeled specifically as like the sort of Lulu rework patch, right?
Got it.
What
So,
what would be the like problems with that?
okay, so I understand your question. So we do try to do things like that. So the thing that I think that maybe we can do better is that we can communicate better and say like, hey, we're changing picks and we're changing war chefs for Lulu. We don't do that right now. We just tell you what the changes are going to be. But the way that we think about it internally is definitely the way you're describing, which is like we do want to make changes that will make Lulu, in this example, stronger, right? Sometimes that doesn't mean changing Lulu, though. It
Of
means
course,
changing
yeah.
Lulu's deck. And you know, in all card games, but especially in our card game, there's a very delicate ecosystem where like sometimes you can change one card's power by one, and suddenly you've totally warped the meta. Like
Yes.
if we made Draven back to a 4/3, that is a small change that would completely warp the meta. He would be the best deck, and it would and only and other decks that could beat him would be the only kind of decks you would see. That would be not good. But if we wanted to make, let's say in this hypothetical, we wanted to make Draven stronger, but not push him over the line, we would find other cards that we know belong with Draven and try to tweak those. So like your Pix example or your Warships example for Lulu. So yes, we do try to do that. We just don't call it out. So what we also talk about internally is like, you know, champions that don't get played a lot that we want them to get played. Lulu. You called out Lulu and Katarina. I think those are good examples. Yasuo examples. Which makes me sad because literally Yasuo is my favorite champion in League IP, and Lulu is one of my top favorite champions in League IP. So having them both not be strong in our game makes me sad. Anyway, it's just hard because it's hard on the communication side because we change cards that some players, skilled players, recognize, oh yeah, this is a Yasuo card. They're trying to make Yasuo stronger. But we don't actually tell players that, so maybe we can do a better job like making it like hypothetically
Yeah.
if we're changing some cards for Lulu, literally in the patch notes saying, hey, this is for Lulu, even though we're not changing Lulu. You know, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I guess basically you're sort of saying that you don't want to like make larger tweaks because single card tweaks can have unexpected consequences. So you don't want to like add more things at once, right? So it's like
so the size of the changes, we're not scared of that. Like I think that we have seen patches where it's like, yo, we changed 20 cards. We've changed. I think our biggest patch ever, we changed 30 different cards in one patch. We're not necessarily scared of that so much of the size, although size is connected to the thing we are scared of, which is like it's really hard to predict what is going to happen to the metagame the more changes we make at once. So the bigger patches we do, there's more unintended outcomes. So like if we buff Lulu, like this is totally hypothetical, but if we buff Lulu and we buff Katarina, then that's great. Those decks might become stronger, but then the decks against them also become stronger. The decks that are good against those strategies become stronger. And so if some deck that's a natural predator of Lulu then becomes the best deck, and now we didn't even think about that, or it's some deck that preys on that deck, like if we go like a second order of complexity deeper, that wasn't even on our radar for a problem, and now that deck is dominating the meta for an extended period of time, we're scared of that. And there's no way, it's very hard to predict. I won't say there's no way, but it's very hard to predict those things happening. And that is why we try to focus on a small number of changes that we think will be the most impactful, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just like kind of slowly creeping, the champs up. And as we've seen, I mean, that is at least currently, working for Vlad. Vlad is seeing like, meta play right now for the first time in basically ever.
For sure. I love it. That's a good example.
All right. Yeah. And
you also mentioned buffs and nerfs. I don't know if you want me to talk about our philosophy around that or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you guys mentioned early on that you wanted to do more buffs than nerfs. And like, I heard some people saying like recently it hasn't felt like there's been a lot of buffs, but I think that is partly just because of the one like balance patch that was out of cadence.
Yeah. So, as a person who's not a game designer, in the beginning I was always like, let's buff.
Yeah.
And then, the struggle is that the more cards that exist in our game, the less impactful a buff is, because a buff changes only one card. Whereas like Twisted Fate right now has a huge impact on the game. If we do some nerfs to Twisted Fate's deck, then that allows other decks that were currently being oppressed by him to rise up and do more. And so the idea is like, if you can find inflection points like that in the meta, where it's like, if we nerf these 2 cards, then these 20 cards all get more stronger, and they all get more play, and the meta becomes more diverse. And so nerfing sucks. Players don't like it. I don't like it. But the idea is like, if you nerf number 1, then number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all move up, and they all get better, right? And so, nerfing sucks. No, in every game I've ever played, when something gets nerfed, I'm pissed about it. If it's the thing I like, I'm pissed about it. And I understand that that's how all players feel. When we do it in our ecosystem, our hope is that like, okay, hypothetically, I'm not saying we're doing this, but hypothetically we nerf Twisted Fate, and then suddenly that means like, I don't know what's going to come up after this, but like maybe that means Azir gets stronger. Maybe that means Talia gets stronger. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, some people know, just not me. I'm not a game designer. Steve thinks about this. Dave thinks about this. So that's why we try to do more nerfs, but buffs are important, because like we mean it when we say that we want every card in our game to be at least somewhat viable, not a complete joke. I know that's not the case right now. There are some number of cards in our game that nobody plays. Yeah. That's sad. But I think like as an ethos, like as a philosophy that we want, is to have most of our cards be playable. And sometimes that means you just need to buff a card because it's like, it's just bad. Like there's no way, like when we changed Funsmith, like Funsmith as an idea is a powerful effect. Like making your spells do 1 more damage is a very powerful effect. And for a long time, she was not played. And so we're like, let's give her 1 more power. Let's give her 1 more health, whatever. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how we changed her. And then after we did that, we saw her play rate go up, but we didn't see any deck she was in become like a nightmare, like, too good. And I think that's kind of a success case for like a buff on a single card. But because it didn't change the meta, that's less impactful to more players. Basically, that's a change only for Funsmith enthusiasts, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like we want to make changes that are for as many players as possible, and that's why it seems like more nerfs than buffs, but we do try to do both. Also, one final point, sorry, I've been talking a lot, is we try to bucket changes in a way that if we are nerfing something in one region, that we are also buffing something in that region. So like if you're a player who loves Demacia, that we like when we nerfed War Chefs for a long time ago, I don't remember what other cards we buffed, but we also buffed Demacian cards because we were just like, we don't want you to stop playing Demacia. We don't want you to feel punished for loving Demacia, right? So we try to package it so that like we're nerfing something in your region, we're buffing something in your region.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I completely agree about like the, you know, buffs being ideal, but you know, nerfs being effectively like necessary, right? Like you can't skip nerfs as a process. I think a lot of people have this mentality of just like, why nerf when you can buff? Both sides are effectively important for different reasons.
Right. I mean, I used to have that mentality. I learned a lot on this.
Yeah, me too, dude.
I was like, why don't we just buff stuff? And then they were like, dude, look at the math. When you buff one card, it moves one card. When you nerf one card, it moves 20 cards. I'm like, smart.
Exactly. All right, I have actually wait. I don't. How long is this conversation? Do you have an allotted amount of time? Because I'm curious.
Good question. I don't know. I think it's scheduled for 2 hours, but
I mean, if you're down, I would, because there's so many things to talk about, and you know, I would.
Yeah, man, let's keep talking. I don't have any time pressure.
I am enjoying it. This is great. So, because I mean, I love game design, and it's great that, you know, there's like at least, you know, a higher angle of communication, because this is all I think what a lot of people in the community want. This is absolutely amazing. So something that I've been something that I've been wondering for a while. My chat won't let this one go. All right, Dovagedys, why is the Watcher 17 mana? Why is it an 11-17? Why those numbers? Do you know?
Good question. I don't know if I'm allowed to answer that question.
Oh,
so the thing
it's a secret.
Is that, like, when you see, it's not a secret, but I think that it's something that will be discovered over time. When you see weird numbers in games like that, they usually exist for a reason. Like 17 mana could be a balance thing. I'm not sure, but it's likely more that it's like telling you a story, and it's part of like the Watcher's lore. And I think that it's important to keep in mind that there are 2 more releases of Shurima where we could learn more about the Watcher.
That makes sense. So there's either going to be a card that discounts by 6 mana, or there's going to be 16 more Watchers. Got it.
Yeah, I mean, so theoretically, and I promise you, I don't know the lore of the Watcher, but there hypothetically could have been 16 Watchers that came before him, like 16 other void things, whatever they are, that came before him. Or it's not a him or a her, came before it, and then it's like dominated those, and now this is where we are. I don't know, but that seems like a potential story that could exist. A lot of Lissandra's lore is tied to the War of the Watchers, right? And her freezing them all, like, you know, eons ago. Actually, I don't know, millennia ago, not eons. And so we might learn more about that. There's this cool thing about our game, something I love about it. I love the League IP. I love League of Legends. I love Teamfight Tactics. I love Legends of Runeterra because I love League IP. And there's a lot of things that exist in the League IP that we don't know the answer to because it hasn't been created yet. And Lissandra's history is one of those things. So we're basically learning it all together. You know, the people who are writing it on our team and in our Lord, in like our LORE department at Riot, you know, that are like figuring this out as we go along, and then we'll tell more in the story. So this is all to say that could be the reason that the Watcher is 17 mana, or it might be about balance. I don't know the answer to that question.
Interesting. Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of speculation when the reveals for that particular set start coming in.
Yes.
Speaking of which, while we're, again, I'm not structuring this in any way, which is why I love that, you're able to put down 2 hours on this, because otherwise I'd have to like prioritize, but I'm just going with the flow, man. Speaking of which,
I love it, dude. I love it.
So the expansion release system, a lot of people have felt like, the expansion, like splitting expansions into 3 parts is kind of like, sort of like hurting the big visceral, big expansion feel that, they've come to expect from other, games or card games. And it's like, it can sometimes be hard for it to kind of have that like big impact. It also can lead to some, kind of like balancing difficulties, not issues, because it just means you guys have to work extra hard because you have to make sure that, Shurima is powerful when it comes out, or like it gets buffed immediately. And then like, as you add more cards there, like you generally have to like tone it down in some ways to match that. And we saw that happen during the Targon expansion. And that's something I was saying you guys did really well during the Targon expansion in particular, was being able to, release it strong and then like kind of like keep the power level roughly even as more cards were added. Although I think Aphelios might have broken that. That's a side topic. But I guess my question is, because I keep forgetting to end these with the questions, is, okay, how do you feel about the kind of like expansion release system? I mean, what are like the pros and cons? Like, are you guys happy about how it's working out?
Good question. Complicated answer. So
yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm about to do the thing again where like I give an answer that might not be satisfying, but I want it to be transparent and give like an actual real answer, not a bullshit corporate answer.
Dude, I really appreciate that. As I also appreciate these 25 gift subs you just dumped in my chat. While casually dropping that.
Yeah. No problem, dude. I love your stream. So and I think your chat is great. So the real issue is that it takes us a long time to make content. So something players might not realize is that we were making set 4 before our game went live. That's how long in advance we make content. And there's a lot of them. And also with the nature of the way we were adding a region with each of the first 4 expansions, that means that by default, each expansion would be bigger than the one that came before it, which there's just a lot of cards. Something that we heard from the community really early in our game was like, hey, 4 months is too long. We don't want to wait 4 months. Like, if you're going to give us Rising Tides in April and we have to wait until August to get Targon, like, that's too long.
Yeah.
And we agree with you. We think that's way too long. So the way, like, there's like a couple of options for how can we give you more content more quickly. One is we make more, but then it costs more money and it costs more people, and like, also takes a long time because it takes us a long, like, if, like, let's say we made the decision of we'll just make more. If we chose that option, then players wouldn't get that for years, for 1.5 to 2 years, because like that's how long it takes us to make content, right? So the decision we made was like, we agree with you. We want to give you content faster. We already had most of Targon expansion made at that time, so we're like, what happens if we split it up and give you pieces of it so that it's like you're getting it faster over time. And that's what we chose to do, as everyone knows. The struggle is that set 3 and set 4 were not designed to do that. They weren't like, if game design had from the beginning designed them as 3 separate pieces, then we wouldn't have this struggle that you called out from Targon, right? And some it's happening to a lesser degree, but it's happening a little bit with Shurima, and that sucks. The good news is, though, that with every new content that comes after that, we have designed that with that in mind, and so the pieces are meant as, for the most part, their own piece. That isn't waiting for new things, so that the new thing comes, like when the 10th region is released, like, you're gonna have the first part. It's gonna be in 3 pieces, and you'll get the first part, and then there will be handholds and breadcrumbs, or whatever you want to, teasers, whatever you want to say, that come in that first release for the second and third release. But it won't feel like there's pieces missing, which I know that some players feel like for the first release of Targon, it felt like pieces were missing, and for Shurima, for the beginning, it felt like pieces were missing. That's true, because they were, but we're fixing that over time so that it doesn't feel that way anymore. Did I answer your question?
No, absolutely. No, that's really good. I think that helps a lot, because a lot of people you know, there are a lot of pros and cons with the set release thing, but one of the ones that people were latching onto was, yeah, the missing pieces felt like they were a little too like limited. But I like the sound of that, the idea of like breadcrumbs but not missing pieces. I also want to point out Uthgar also just dropped a gift sub bomb here. So Uth is God, I don't remember, I don't know if he's a founder or CEO of Mobalytics, but he's, you know, big, you know, the Mobalytics guy, who, you know, I've talked to quite a bit in the last year, and I hear, Dovagedys, that you and him actually have quite the background.
True, a really funny story. Well, funny, not funny, haha, funny, like interesting, coincidental. Is that in the beginning of the WoW days, back in 2004, 2005, Uthgar and I played WoW together.
Yeah.
And he is an incredibly smart, incredibly nice human. Literally, I would say one of the most nice people I have ever met, both in real life or in the internet. He's an insane human.
Yeah,
Insanely
I fucking love Uth,
person.
man.
And so then, you know, we became friends in WoW, and we became friends outside of WoW, and we hung out a little bit, but we kind of drifted away from each other. Like 2005 was a long time ago. And then when before our game was launched, we were, Mobalytics approached us and was like, hey, you know, we want to do this thing for your game. We want to be this website. And we're like, cool. And we started working together. And then I found out that Uthgar worked there, and I was like, holy, what? And then we just like reconnected. So we were friends on the internet in WoW a long time ago, and we had met a few times in real life, but we have definitely reconnected since Mobalytics and Legends of Runeterra have become a partnership.
That's
it's
really
kind of
cool.
Amazing story.
Yeah. That's crazy. I imagined it would be like, you know, because I heard you two used to play WoW together, but I didn't actually think about that, like, you know, that was so long ago, and it's actually like it's just, I mean, not complete coincidence, but it's almost, yeah, fortuitous that you guys are reconvening and able to, you know, have very adjacent goals here.
It's true, and I'll throw some spice at him because he's probably watching.
Oh yeah.
We try to play LoR together, but he's terrible.
Yeah.
And so it's not really a fun experience because he's so bad at Legends of Runeterra.
Yeah. 100%.
Sorry, I love you.
I didn't even try to play with him. That's...
But I will also, in his defense, I will say that he is exceptionally good at other games. Just and he loves Legends of Runeterra. It's just not his game. He is exceptionally good at other games.
Oh man.
I'm not. I see your chat calling me toxic. It's not toxic. It's all for fun. I know that he is laughing right now. Just trust me.
Man.
Cool, dude. Any other topics you want to talk about?
Yeah. So is there is 10 regions is that it? Void after 10?
Is that it?
Yeah. Was
what
that confirmed?
Is that like a joke? There are definitely only 10 regions.
Okay, got
it. That is confirmed.
Yeah, and then the last one is, you know, Void, which is, I mean, it's not.
Well, so I can't say what it is, obviously, but I will call out that I know that there's a lot of posts on Reddit where people want it to be the Void, but I think that those people should really ask themselves the question of, like, how many Void champions exist in Legend of League IP? The answer is not that many. And so if we do the Void, they should set themselves for the expectation that there's probably going to be a lot of not Void champions in it if we did that, or we might not do it at all because, you know, there aren't enough. And so I'm not going to say what it is. I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of people who make, like, Void. They have all these predictions, which is awesome. I love the prediction stuff about the Void, but, you know, there are lots of expectations that people are building for themselves, and I'm like, whoa, like, do people not understand there's only 7 Void champions and one of them has already accidentally leaked and not in the 5th expansion? So, like, you know, it's hard. It would be really hard for us to do that. I'm not saying we're not doing it, but it just would be really hard. So
all right. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a ton of concessions you guys have to make. I mean, when you're, like, transferring the whole IP over, they're just, like, almost as diametrically opposed genres as possible, like MOBAs and card games, like, absolutely, you know.
Yeah. Related to this topic, League of Legends is an old game. You know,
Hmm.
it's 11 years old now, and they made a lot of game design decisions, not thinking about other games. Which why would they? They didn't do anything wrong. They did great.
Yeah.
But like, if you think about like when we talk about this void issue, there are other issues on the opposite end of the spectrum where it's like there are a lot of popular champions in League of Legends that are all Ionian. If you look at the top 20 most popular champions in League of Legends, something like 13 of them are Ionian, and that makes it really hard for a game like us that cares about regions and wants to get popular champions from League into
Yeah.
our game to get all those Ionian champions into our game. Like, you know, people still can't believe that there's no Jin or Master Yi or Zaya or, you know, whatever. Those are all, or Ari or Rengar or whatever. Those are
Akali.
all, Akali. Those are all Ionian, and
Yeah.
it's just really tough to solve this problem.
That
So
makes a lot of sense because I mean, from what I've played of League, and I've played, you know, a couple days at this point, I've noticed a lot of people really seem to like these, you know, these fast ninja kind of like, yeah, like they just go in and then they go out. Like I've seen them all over my games, and it's honestly kind of annoying because I keep dying to them. But yeah, those do seem quite
yeah, it's true.
popular. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, your chat's popping off with a bunch of different champions. Almost all of them are Ionian, and that's
Yeah.
true. And like those champions don't exist in our game, and that makes me sad. But soon, we're working on it. I promise. Our goal is to eventually have, you know, it's going to take some time, but eventually to have all of the champions from League IP in our game. It just takes a while for that to happen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Ionia will definitely be it will have a second coming, as it were.
Maybe. So maybe. I mean, I'm like one execution. Again, this is totally fictitious, but some people in our dev team talk about like, what if we made like Ionian Civil War or whatever, and then just put a
Ooh.
bunch of Ionian champions in our game. I will say right now that is not happening. We are not doing that. It's just like an idea that we talk about
Yeah.
because of the Ionian problem. And the reason
Mhm.
this came up again was because of the Void has a very similar problem, but at the opposite end of the spectrum.
I see. Yeah, that makes quite a bit of sense. So when you say Civil War, you were like, were you thinking about splitting it into effectively two regions, or like, what do you
Yeah,
mean?
like
Okay.
like a long time ago in
Yeah, a very
development, I
long
would say
time
like
ago.
3 years ago, we thought about making two Ionian regions instead of just one,
Yeah,
where
which
it's
is
like one are the good guys and one are the bad guys. I have no idea what that would look like, but we ended up not doing that.
yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Hmm. All right. All right. Perfect. So I guess here. Let me see. What do we have next?
I
So
mean, before we started our call, we were talking to your chat about the patch cadence of like why it takes 2 weeks or whatever. I'm
yeah,
not sure if you
yeah.
want to talk about that.
Yeah, I wanted to at least like explore that because I wanted to clear that up. I don't know if that was like exactly the reason, but basically what I was saying was, you know, it felt like okay. So backing up from what I know, and I think this was mentioned by, I believe Andrew said something along these lines on the Twin Sons podcast a while ago, that there was, you know, something involving, you know, one of the mobile stores that like added an extra delay with the patch cadence just because, you know, games come to mobile, such that you guys had to effectively pre-submit the patch notes fully a week or two in advance. Is that like off completely, or like what are the true aspects of that? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, we think that talking about this to the community is really boring, which is why we don't do it that often. But I think like if people want to know the answer, I'm happy to share. So basically, the way we make our game is we have to have everything completed 2 weeks before it ever gets to live.
Yeah.
And the reason we have to do that, there's a lot of reasons, but the big reasons are one, mobile submission for both Google and Apple
Yeah.
takes time, where we have to submit the build to them and they have to say, hey, this isn't going to break stuff. Okay, good, you're good to go. And then another big reason is for localization. Our game is published in 17 different languages. It takes time. Like we make the game in English, but then it takes teams and teams of people to turn the English product into all those other languages. And so the work has to be done to give them time to do it before it can go live, because some games, like something League of Legends used to do, it doesn't do anymore, was their game would release in English and then a week later release, you know, in other languages. We don't want to do that, and League doesn't do that anymore. It hasn't done it for a very long time, actually. But in order for us to do that, that means we have to complete our work 2 weeks and not do any work on it before it goes to players. The way that affects our live balances and stuff is that means like the live balance team has to basically use 2-week old information and
Yes.
guess what the next 2 weeks are going to look like, and then make changes, right? Which makes it really hard.
That's really, really difficult. And I've like, I'm glad you were able to confirm that, because I wasn't sure if that was like still true, or if that would like, if I had some of the details wrong. But basically, this has been something that I've said a couple times in the past, because there have been a couple patches. The Heimerdinger, was one where, there was something that people were, viscerally complaining about for a while. And then, like as soon as the meta shifts away, that's like when the nerf comes in. And that sometimes happens just because everything has to be done 2 weeks in advance. And that's 2 weeks is a pretty long window, right?
Totally. So that's connected to an answer we talked about earlier, which is like Twisted Fate has been too strong for too long.
Yeah.
But we want to see if the meta is going to change and fix it itself. Because if we react too quickly, then we get exactly what you just called out, which is like we make a change, then the meta shifts before that change goes live, and then people are like, "Yo, why did you change this? It's not even strong anymore."
Yeah.
So that's why we try to wait some time to see what the meta is going to do before we make changes.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And so, going off on, you were saying before that everything is designed a very long time in advance, right? Like all these new cards are all designed down the pipeline, like like maybe a year or two. I don't know if there's a fair average, but a year or two ago from when we see them, right? Like you were saying, Shurima or 4A was all preset, like before we saw the game, right? Like 2 years ago.
I wouldn't say it was preset. The work had started.
Okay.
The work had not finished. But yeah, in general, what you're saying is true.
Yeah. So from my understanding, a lot of like the new cards, the designs are like pretty locked in, like earlier down the road. Is that like all locked in terms of like design and balance, or is there some kind of like contextualizing process, like taking those new things basically a month before the launch, taking those things within the context of kind of like the current metagame and sort of like seeing if they need to be tweaked or balanced based on that context?
You're asking all these good questions that have big, complicated answers.
Oh yeah, that's the thing, man. It's rough because the good questions have no good answers. It's hard.
Yeah, totally, and I love it. I'm happy to answer. So the short answer is that in the beginning, we did not do the thing you're calling out, and we realized like that doesn't work. We need to have a team of people that thinks about what the context of the live game is going to be when the cards are being designed. So now we have a specific team. We call them the gameplay analysis team, of which one of your friends, I think, Aleko
Yeah.
And so he is one of the people on the gameplay analysis team that their main job, they have lots of jobs and they're great. They do amazing. But one of their main jobs is to think about new content in the context of the whole game and call out
That's completely credible.
The things that are too good or not good enough. So like, as a specific example, the 10th region, our fifth expansion, is, or it's our fourth expansion, I don't know. Our fifth expansion that comes out in August, the first split that comes out in August. We just recently have been playtesting it a ton with the gameplay analysis team because they're trying to figure out like, hey, does Azir plus one of the champions in that new set, is it too strong? Is it going to dominate the meta?
Yeah.
And so we do actively design and play test that way so that they call, so like let's say Aleko, an example, he says, okay, Azir plus some champion I can't say, too powerful. Designers do something about it, and he'll also, it's kind of amazing, he'll say exactly why it's too strong, like what's wrong with it, and then he gives that information to the designers who are working on that new champion, and then they make changes basically.
Yeah.
And the hope is that when those new cards come out, there's not some thing that we didn't expect with Azir plus that champion. We've seen it. That team has play tested a bunch. Like, we kind of know what it looks like. There are things that slip through because obviously there's a lot of cards in our game and we can't see everything. An example of something that slips through is the concurrent timelines Liedros combo. To be completely honest, we didn't think about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, for the most part, that team does amazing work, and they find a lot of things that help make our game safer and more fun and more diverse, rather than just being like the Azir whatever champion I can't name show for a whole expansion.
That's that's really, really, really good news, man. I actually I suggested that idea to Aleko a few months ago. I don't know if that was like implemented off that suggestion, but that's
I think it's good minds think smart
yeah,
ideas
yeah,
had by multiple people, because
yeah.
the gameplay analysis team has existed for a little bit over a year now.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, that's absolutely amazing because that's like really, really, really cool. I think that's a really big deal because I was aware like a while ago that that you guys weren't doing it at the start. And that's
We were not doing it at the start. That is true.
yeah. And that to me was one of the kind of like iffy spots, but that's amazing because contextualizing everything super super important, and that was kind of like to me one of the like in my head I was like, oh man, they're designing it all 2 years in advance, and sometimes that's like why things feel a little off, but that makes so much more sense. That's perfect.
Hell yeah. I just saw a lot of people in the chat saying that the Leandros combo is a mistake. I would not go so far. I think like even though we missed that interaction, there are players who play card games who play our game who
Hmm.
love combos.
Yeah.
And that deck's win rate is below 50%, but still a lot of people play it, even though they lose more often than they win. So that to me suggests that there are people who like it. I understand it's sharp. I'm not saying we're not going to do anything about it, but we try to make decisions that are like good for everyone.
Hmm.
Even when there's something that's discovered, emergent gameplay is what people say at work, of like, oh, we didn't expect that to happen, but that's really cool.
Yeah.
So, as long as it's not breaking our metrics, we're like, oh cool, they found something we didn't find, love it. My favorite example in our game's history was in all of our Heimerdinger playtesting before the beta came out. Well, I won't say never, but very few of us playtested him with Noxus. And then in beta, as you probably remember, maybe you made this famous, I'm not sure, somebody made it famous, of playing him with Noxian cards, and it was like really good because there were a lot of three cost Noxian cards that worked well with him.
Yeah, yeah.
And they made the elusive unit, and that deck was strong, and we were like, whoa, never even saw that before. And that was kind of the moment where we were like, we do need a gameplay analysis team.
Yeah.
So
Oh, so going off on that, what were some of the biggest, I guess, like lessons that the team has learned so far during LOR's development in the last I'd say in the last year, basically since the game went live?
do you mean around balance, or do you mean like in general?
I mean, let's say in general, although I don't think people would be interested in like the production side of things, just like
I mean, I think then I'll try to think of like the sexy things.
yeah, the sexy things. That's it.
I think honestly, I think like we just talked about one of the big learnings, which was, or two of the biggest changes, which were like we need to give players content more frequently, because 4 months is too long, and that was a significant change that has had pain that you've all have
Oh yeah.
experienced. Another one was like we need to have the gameplay analysis team involved in making content from the very beginning. So like something that is now new that we didn't used to do is that each member of the gameplay analysis team is embedded on each team that's working on new content. So the team that's focused on our next expansion that comes in August, they have had a gameplay analysis team member on their team that's in all their meetings and in all their design meetings and like in the development of the set from the very beginning, so that they can start calling out like
That's
things
big,
we've learned.
yeah.
And so that's a big deal, and that helps a lot. Actually, since Aleko is on the expansion that comes after that, the one that comes in 2022, in the beginning of 2022. Yeah. And it's amazing to be able to see his feedback on cards when they're like, they have no art yet. They basically have no nothing. They're just blank cards that have text on them because it's that early in the development.
Mm-hmm.
And he's giving awesome feedback, helping the game be more balanced from the beginning rather than it happening at the end. So I think that those two are the two biggest differences from what do players care about. I think another huge difference is that we are trying to make game modes that aren't just for ladder players. Lab of Legends has been a huge success,
Yeah.
and we want to try to be making more things that are in that vein that give players stuff to do that's not just grind the ladder. So I think those are three big things off the top of my head. I'd have to think about it more to think of more answers.
Mm.
People want to see 2v2 ladder. Love it. Maybe someday. Maybe someday.
Oh yeah, I want to see the 2v2 ladder, man. That's what I need. At the very least, the ability to build decks, because I really think that I don't know, the 2v2 really speaks to me. I love, these kind of initiatives to try to like, sort of like, yeah, the whole like lab thing, try to like, find more of like the unique aspects that Legends of Runeterra can offer. The like dungeon run, the Lab of Legends, the 2v2, and I mean whatever else you guys have planned in the future, like the big labs.
Yeah, we want to be doing a lot more of that. I think that our game has the highest chance for success if we're giving more and more players different things to do, not just beat each other up. Like beating each other up in 1v1 is fun, and a lot of our players right now like that, but there are a lot of players out there who don't want to do that. They, they want that dungeon run, they want that 2v2 experience, they want to play with their friends, and we want to give those players something to do too. So I think like this year is going to be exciting. We're releasing a lot of new stuff. Actually, this year and next year is going to be really exciting for our game because we're trying to do more and more. Yeah. Actually, related to something you and I talked about in your chat the other day, like I see sometimes on social media, players are worried that like, our game is failing or that Riot's not investing, and that is absolutely not true. Actually, Riot gives us more and more money. They gave us more money at the beginning of this year. They're investing in us more and more. Like our CEO and our C-level executives, they really believe in Legends of Runeterra, and the investment is going up, not down. So I don't want people to be scared and to think that our game is, gonna suddenly disappear.
Yeah. No, I mentioned this, and that's crazy good news, because I think a lot of people, including myself, in like the card game environment, like I've been playing, the digital card games like throughout like many different games for a very long time, but like for last 5 years in particular, there's been a lot of that. There's been a lot of, kind of like dead projects or like failures, things that have like tried, but then they ended up like kind of pulling funding and stalling out. And that personally was one of my concerns. And I know that's true for anyone who's kind of been through this trajectory, right? Like, I mean, Gwent ended up kind of like, going downhill because of like downsizing and like less funding for the team. Artifact, of course, is just, completely dead at this point. And there's there's a lot of card games, a lot of the small ones as well, have kind of like tried and then like failed to build up momentum. So I was incredibly glad when you pointed that out, when you mentioned, confirming that like that's not what's happening in this case, because a lot of people were just concerned because of lack of communication. But that's just like, when I say lack of communication in this case, that's like basically like one missed like dev video kind of thing. It just felt like there was a gap in the cadence,
Totally. And it's hard for us to talk about publicly, like, how are we investing in the game and stuff, because again, most players think that's boring, and it is boring. I do get concerned when people are worried, like some of the examples you gave of like, is that going to happen to our game? Maybe, but not yet. And like I can't see the future, but I know that Riot really believes in our game. Yeah. Our team isn't getting smaller; it's actually getting bigger. We want to do more. We want this to be our goal. To be completely honest, is to like be one of the games that lasts for years and years and years. And not very many games get to do that. Not just in this genre, but in any genre. Most video games do not get to last for years and years and years. But for that to happen, it takes investment. And there are other games in our genre that they're monsters, and by monsters I mean they're hugely successful, and deservedly so. They're fucking great. Like when like the reason we made Legends of Runeterra is because we love those games. That's why and so like it's a tough market out there, but we're not giving up. And we don't talk about our metrics a lot, but our game is doing well. We want it to do better. But that doesn't mean it's dying. It's definitely not.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's amazing news. And, I have personally pretty high hopes. There's the new Lab of Legends iteration is coming out in 4 days, I think. Yep, true. Like, and I mean, I'm gonna personally, assume that there's gonna be some kinds of added bells and whistles to that. I think that's like a really solid formula to iterate on. And I mean, you know me, I love that. I've spent just a ridiculous amount of hours on those stupid challenge runs that I make.
Did I just swear? Your chat's saying their children are watching. What the? This is a PG-13 stream, I guess.
I have honestly, no idea. I can't tell what they're on about half the time.
Fair enough. Yeah, I honestly don't know how you or any streamer does it. Like I can't imagine trying to play games and read chat at the same time. Sounds insane.
It's honestly really distracting. I wish I could like, I mean I can, but like whenever I like make a misplay or something, like it's always gonna sound like an excuse if I blame it on the fact that I'm like, you know, reading chat. But like, man, you play so much worse when you're like trying to focus, like playing in stuff like tournaments or even just like, you know, ranked ladder. It's just like it's so much harder. And like everyone who starts streaming says that, man, I didn't expect this to be that hard, but God, it's something
True.
I can't, you can't really normally talk about because there's no way to ever say that without it just sounding like a bad excuse. But like, it just, yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah, personally, when I was taking Magic very seriously, playing it at like, you know, semi-pro or pro level, I noticed that a common way to improve at Magic is to play with people watching you and to talk about your decision making while you're playing. That's how you.
Yeah.
That's a good way to get better quickly. And it always made me play worse because anytime I'm having a conversation, I started to notice that like my actual play just goes to the toilet. Like it's just like so bad, and I had to stop doing it. And I think that that's kind of like streaming, except to the times 100. Where you're like, you know, you have 1,000 people yelling at you, and you know, how are you? I don't know how you do it. I don't know how any streamer does it, especially the streamers who are elite players as well. Like, you know, when I see you and people make fun of you like making a mistake, I'm like, dude, he's made one mistake in like 100 turns. That's insane, considering all of the conversation that's happening around you.
Yeah. Oh man.
Anyway.
All right. Here, let me see. Oh man, here's something that I always love to talk about because people love just kind of like these little like gems of insight. So what are some cards that looked just like really different in early playtesting, like early versions of things that we never got to see, that were either like completely broken or completely breakable, you know? Like what are some like crazy versions of stuff?
Crazy versions of stuff. Okay, some of my favorites, I guess, are Twisted Fate, actually, when he was in development.
Here we go. This is gonna be good.
Blue card gave 2 spell mana for a long time, and it was messed up, but not enough people on the team were playing it. And then actually, some members on the gameplay analysis team were like, "This is unshippable. This is like a gigantic mistake, unshippable." And so then sometimes we have internal tournaments to the team or at Riot where we try to identify like, okay, show everybody, play your hardest, try to win this tournament, show us what's good, you know?
Yeah.
And before content's released or whatever, and a member of the GAT team was absolutely just slapping people with TF blue card giving 2 blue mana. It was 2 spell mana, which is absolutely insane. Another one that I'm a huge fan of is that Funsmith for a long time internally was a 3 mana 3/3 that also made your spells deal 1 more damage.
Yeah.
That was way over the line, obviously. I'm trying to. A lot of the things I'm thinking of right now are things that aren't released yet that changed, so it's hard for me to.
Oh no, you can just tell us.
True Shot Barrage is another one of my favorites where it did the same thing, but it was 5 mana, and I think a 5 mana deal 6 damage is probably over the line. So we ended up
that would have been quite a bit better at 5.
Yeah. Honestly, most of the examples are spells because of the way spell mana works in our game. It's in the beginning for us. It was really hard for us to judge like how good is a spell. And as the community knows now, you look at like when you see Vengeance for the first time when you're new to our game, and you're like, what Doomblade costs 2 mana? Why does Vengeance cost 7 mana? This is a joke. But it's because spell mana warps the power of spells so greatly.
Right.
So a lot of spells we get wrong in the beginning.
I'm guessing Vengeance started at either 4 or 5.
Which card?
Vengeance.
I think a long time ago it was maybe 4 or 3 mana.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like
because it's just like too busted.
When you're comparing it to other games, because it's not just the spell mana, it's also like the fast speed and like the open attacking dynamic is just like so insane.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%.
Here I'll give you another one that's really nutty. So, Legion Drummer, the 3/2 that that supports to give a quick strike. A very long time ago, when our game was very different, that card was a 3 mana 3/3 that every time you cast a spell, all of your units would get 1 power and overwhelm.
Oh, yeah.
That was over the line because we ended up in the internal meta. We ended up in a world where it's like who can play that card on turn 3 and then cast 3 spells wins the game.
Yeah,
So we moved away from that.
that's
It was
crazy.
kind of nuts.
So these internal playtests, are there general like ways they the meta in the internal playtest tends to differ from like the live meta? Are there like any sort of generalizations, like things that tend to be more common in, you know, the internal dev metas than the ones we see on live?
Good question. Hard to answer. So basically, there are lots of different internal style playtests we do. Some of them
Yeah.
are like for finding bugs, where it's like we don't care about balance so much. It's like testing, just try to test every card.
Yeah.
Um, and then there are more tournament style ones where it's like, hey, show us, you know, players haven't gotten this content yet, show us what's good. Usually what happens in those is that the gameplay analysis team, because they know all the good stuff already, usually they like bring some stuff and they teach everyone a lesson. Or I guess more recently in some of our tournaments like that, what happens is they will make decks for everyone else, because it becomes silly when like they just win every tournament because they have so much more context. So
Yeah.
usually what we do now is that they will make decks for everyone and then share them out, and then people like pick which one they want to pick. So like,
That makes a lot of
you
sense.
know,
Yeah.
before Shurima came out, there was a lot of like Azir decks and Renekton decks that they had like made for us, for people, to like see how good they are. And it's a little bit tough because across Legends of Runeterra there is a wide variance in play skill of our game.
Mm.
And so doing tournaments is a little bit tough because it's like some people know they're never going to win a tournament, and you know, we're just trying to have fun while also trying to learn about the game.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah. No,
Okay,
100%. That's pretty much. I didn't really expect it to look like super different, but that's good insight. A lot of people are just kind of curious about that kind of thing. It's always interesting for people to have, you know, a bit more of a vision of like how things look on the inside and like what that process looks like. Yeah, I'm glad. You know, you mentioned before the that it's important that, you know, things are kind of allowed to be broken before they get nerfed. Like I do completely agree with that. Obviously, you know, with the addendum that both of us agree on, just clarifying for chat, you know, obviously it's better for nerfs to happen earlier rather than later, but after the thing happens in general compared to before. Because when like pre nerfs, within the context of like something being like powerful, it just tends to leave the game feeling like kind of like, you know, watered down. Like a lot of like the release cycles can feel like, you know, oh, why is this so much mana? Like it must have been good internally. Like I've had that thought a decent amount, which is like I see some of the new cards or some of the like really scalable cards, like the combo-y kinds of cards, and it's kind of felt like, you know, sometimes it's like, wow, this must have just been good internally because, you know, it launched a little bit on the light end, and that kind of thing happens absolutely when, you know, you're a little on the pre-nerf angle of things. I just saw people talking about like pre-nerfs being, you know,
I mean, absolutely. I think like a design philosophy we have is that when designers are creating cards, they try to, especially champion cards, they really try to make it fucked up. They want to make this card fun and splashy and powerful, and they want like me to read the card for the first time and be like, whoa, we can't make this is nuts. Like that feeling that any player gets of like when they read a card being like, wow, we want that as much
exactly that's a good thing. That's exactly right.
The struggle though is that like then, so usually what happens is we make most of the cards way too good, and then we scale them back like through playtests or whatever. We figure out where is the line where this still looks exciting, it still feels exciting, it still does a powerful thing, but it's not dominating, right?
Yeah.
Or oppressing other strategies. And so sometimes we slip stuff. Like I think like here's another fun example. Like some of Aphelios's weapons were absolutely bananas. Like
Okay.
the one that gives lifesteal used to, and there was a point in development where it gave +2/+2 and granted lifesteal.
Oh.
And you know, the gameplay analysis team was like, you cannot make this. Like, first of all, they called out no card in our game grants lifesteal, which was true.
Yeah.
So that would be like adding a new thing that our game didn't do, which is a very dangerous thing to start doing. And then also like +2/+2 and granting lifesteal for 3 mana is bananas. You can't do that. And so we scaled it back. And then so we scaled it back, and then it was still actually probably still too good. So that's like a good example of we want to make things that are powerful and exciting, but we don't want them to be oppressive.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, we're not there's going to be, I believe, the balance patch, the next balance patch is going to be in a couple of days here. And I mean, you know, you're not, people are asking about like stuff, but that's not the topic here. I'm sure we'll see some kind of nerf to, you know, both somewhere in the TF package as well as somewhere in the Aphelios package. That's
Maybe.
So
I mean we're all gonna learn on Monday. Everyone's gonna learn. Wait, on Tuesday, whenever the patch notes come out, exactly
Tuesday.
What's changing. I don't want to take the wins out of the sail for those changes. So right now everything is a maybe.
Yeah, everything's a maybe.
But obviously, like we mentioned before, those changes were locked in 2 weeks ago. So I know exactly what they are, but I'm not gonna.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So you know the metagame. What like, man, metagame is so interesting because, you know, we talked a lot about specific decks and like metrics and like when a deck is performing well and when a deck is performing kind of like underwhelmingly, and you have a bunch of different metrics. You need to be able to see the whole picture. You know, there's no like single right answer. It's just a lot of different lenses that give you the whole picture. So I wanted to talk though, what are some of the big metrics for a metagame? Like what's the ideal meta for Riot? And I mean, I'm sure that's changed. Yeah, like what are the good markers you guys look for? Do you have like a specific live meta that might have been like, you know, like, oh yeah, this is perfect right now? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think like in general, metas that we think are perfect are usually when the community thinks it's perfect.
Yeah,
that is one of the things we care about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there were a few different metas last year for like a month or two that were like really inspiring, where we had, you know, I think there was a moment in time where there were like 12 S tier decks by our definition, not by like, you know, player definition.
Yeah.
And then there were like 27 S plus A tier decks at the same time, and none of them had a super high play rate. I think the highest play rate was like 5%. And it was just like really diverse. So like diversity,
Yeah,
I think is like the number one thing we care about in the meta. So, you know, as players have called out, rightfully so, right now is not the most diverse meta. It's definitely not the least diverse meta that we've had, but it's definitely not the most. So like when we have multiple decks that have more than a 10% play rate, that's not good. That's not a good meta in my opinion, because we want I think we have said this publicly, but a goal we set out from before our game was even live was that we want to have a meta game where there's like 10 decks that are like viable in competitive play, right?
Yeah.
And having that goal at the time was a little bit crazy because our two biggest competitors quite often only have 2 to 3 to maybe 5 decks, right? And in their golden age metas, they have like 5 decks, but in most of the time they have 2 or 3 decks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so saying that, people used to laugh. People internally, rioters, used to laugh at me when I would say, no, that's our goal. Our goal is 10. So anyway, so to answer your question, when we see metas that have like 10 decks, 15 decks, 20 decks, that to me is like, hell yeah, we're doing it. And even in this bad meta, well, what have some people have called bad, you know, where Lissandra and TF both have a deck that both have 10% of the meta each, like that is not good. We don't want that. But also there are 7 other decks that are like, you know, out there doing work. Unfortunately, TF is the TF Fizz deck is just too good for those decks to really shine out, and for our players to really be able to play the decks they want to play. So I guess, okay, so if I turn all that into one sentence, I think that the thing we care about most is diversity.
Yeah.
And for players to be able to play the cards they want to play and not feel dumb. Like if you take 2 champions, any 2 champions in our game, and you make a deck and then you have less than like 45% win rate, that sucks. And we really try hard to have no deck have like a really terrible win rate, because we don't want any player to feel like they're dumb for trying to play some champions.
That makes sense. So the balance of like just trying to make sure that everything is kind of like functional with everything else. That's interesting. Because I mean, there's definitely some downsides of that one, because I've noticed that about like deck building, that it feels like a lot of it just ends up being mixing and matching. For me as a deck builder, that leads to some things feeling like oh, what's the point? It's just a worse version of X other thing, right? Like it's definitely very true that you can kind of like mix and match so many different things. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I do think this is a very interesting topic, and I really the way we think about this phenomena that you called out is that we're trying to make this game for a lot of different types of players,
Of course.
and you're in like the elite
Oh
section
yeah,
of
no.
like superpower gamer, and so like, you know, when you're evaluating cards and you're evaluating decks, quite often, and I think this is totally normal, especially for someone who's elite at any game, is to be like, yeah, this when someone says, hey, this try this deck, and you're like, well, that's just a worse version of this deck. I think that is sometimes true, but to a player who's less skilled than you or has a different goal than you, they just want to play Lulu. They just want to
Yeah.
play, they just want to play their champion. I think that it is more okay for some of the decks to be similar. That said, we don't want too many of that. We don't, we never want like, this is totally made up, but we don't want to make like, trying to think of a champion. Fuck, I'm trying not to leak also. Okay. So we don't want, like in this totally made up world, we would hate it if Jinx and Shyvana were exactly the same,
Yeah.
just in different regions. That would be a fail case. So we don't want to do things like that. But when we start to get to the players in the highest echelon of skill, that is a shortcut your brain uses to like say, okay, I'm not going to play Shyvana because Shyvana and Jinx are exactly the same, but Piltover is a better region, so I'm going to play Jinx, right? We don't want you to be. Some of that is okay, but we don't want it to be carbon copy where like all players feel that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And obviously with game design, you have to keep like so many different like archetypes of players in mind, and you have to like weigh them differently. And I certainly don't mean to suggest that you should like overcommit for like the super high level players. I'm just thinking, so in terms of like the meta diversity, because a lot of like card game metas go from like the top bottom, a lot of a good amount of net decking, as it were. I think that the two forces are definitely in fairly direct opposition, and that's why the idea of balancing those axes exists. But the idea of trying to make sure every champion is pairable with other champions does ultimately end up either directly or indirectly opposing the goal of like sustained diversity, because having like so much scalability and like basically like less sort of like specifically unique decks I feel like that will have to end up meaning that there's like it's going to be really hard to meet that like 10 specifically unique meta decks thing that you were saying, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and you're right. The problem gets harder and harder with the more cards we add to the game. It also gets harder with each new game mode we add, because now like let's say hypothetically players in your chat said they want 2v2 ladder or whatever. Like if and when the day comes that we add that thing, holy shit, now we're balancing for like all these different things. It becomes even more complicated, but we got some ideas.
Okay.
We're not giving it up. We're not giving up. But we're gonna fail sometimes, and we're okay with that as long as the players are okay with it. I think like a beautiful thing about our community, literally my favorite. Someone once asked me, a reporter once asked me, like, what's my favorite thing about League or about Legends of Runeterra, working on Legends of Runeterra, and my answer is literally the positivity our community has.
Yes, they're really positive. Yeah.
It's nuts. I have never seen this kind of positivity.
Neither have I.
And that's wild, and I love it. And so, I think part of that is really powerful. It's really powerful on its own, but it really helps us when we make a mistake. Like, if Twisted Fate has gone on too long, which maybe it has, then that's a mistake that we like stumble, but we're gonna do better. Like, we're not doing that on purpose. We're listening to you all. We're listening to the community. We didn't plan that out, and so like thank goodness that our community is so positive, because if this was like other game communities, who knows what our Reddit would look like, who knows what our Twitter would look like in this current meta, so I'm really excited that our community is so positive.
For me currently,
and lets us make mistakes.
It's all about the long term. It's all about, as long as you're like adaptive and I guess, as you put it, learning from mistakes, that's to me is the most important thing, right? Like, I don't really care what happens with Fizz or Aphelios. I care what you were saying earlier about the idea of like changing up like the balance approach. Like I'm really invested in that eventual announcement of what the new balanced cadence is going to look like and what the philosophy behind it is going to be. That to me is the by far the most important thing, because that's going to dictate, I mean, everything in the future. And
Dude, we absolutely feel the same way. We
yeah.
want to be long-term focused. We
Yep.
want to be learning from mistakes. And I just want to make sure that you and everyone who's listening understands that we are
Perfect.
just now starting the conversation for like how do we update it. So it will be some time before we like make decisions and then are able to share them with everyone. So, you know, I hope I didn't accidentally set people up to think like, oh, this is coming very soon. I think like later this year we will be able to announce our new ethos, because we haven't even, like, right now it's on one of our senior game designers' plates to like figure it out. So it's at the very beginning. So we're still, you know, I'm sharing to be transparent, but also it's going to be a while, because it takes a long time to make, because we don't want to make brash changes. We don't want to change something quickly and it be wrong. We would rather it take longer and be a good change.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
So
I mean, going back to meta design, I think there's one thing that people are talking about a good bit right now, which is this idea of the value of attacking, the value of the attack token, and this phenomenon of what people are calling like a backline champion or strategy, which is, you know, that a lot of the stronger strategies right now are built around not having to attack, right? Like the attacking mechanic, obviously there's plenty of exceptions to this. This is a generalization, but on average, the attacking identity of things has kind of like lowered quite a bit. Like anything that, any card or any deck that is kind of like required to attack with like specific units to be able to get value out of them end up being really stunted. And you know, like we see various examples of that. Whereas the champions that just kind of sit on the bench, and this is TF and Aphelios, but there's more than that, end up being like really powerful. Sure. Is this like, I mean, obviously this is on your guys' radar, but like, I mean, what do you even do about that exactly?
I love this question. Good question. I think calling them backline or back row champions totally makes sense. We talk about them internally that way as well. And there are other ones. There's Kindred as well, and Azir. It's kind of, so I agree exactly with what you're saying, that when a champion is forced to attack to get its most value, I think that's when the game is most fun. So if that play pattern is stunted, as you say, I think that's a failure. Yep. And so like I think Azir is my favorite example of this, where Azir level 1 is a back row champion for sure, but level 2 you actually want to attack with him because he gains so much power from making many units.
That's a really good point.
And so then you're rewarded for attacking with him, even though as level 1 he was back row. Level 2 he can be still, but doesn't necessarily. But you get more value at attacking. You're incentivized to attack with him. We want Legends of Runeterra to be a combat game because we think that's the most fun. We think that's the most skill testing, and we think it's the most fun. So, backrow champions now have they have an extra design axis on them that we have to care about, which is like, does this backrow champion totally stop active like combat champions? If so, that's bad. We can't do that. So I think, in my opinion, Kindred doesn't really do this, even though she's a backrow champion.
Exactly.
She doesn't stop you from attacking, right? Whereas Twisted Fate literally stops you with gold card, and sometimes red card if your units are already hurt, and
Aphelios with a weapon too,
and Aphelios with a weapon, exactly. That sucks. So there will be more back row champions as time goes on because it's an interesting design space. Some players love that kind of style. Like personally, I love Kindred's play style. I think it's really fun, and there's a lot of players who feel similarly. So we want to keep that design space in the game. We just don't want it to be oppressive to the other playstyles as well. So that means like if TF and Aphelios, as examples, continue to be oppressive back row champions, then they will need to see changes. Or they will need to see other decks that are good at preying upon them to make sure that they're not like dominating the whole metagame, right? And a little bit of a spoiler is like we are going to be making more back row champions. Like there's some more back row champions coming up because like we have seen so far with these newer ones that players love it. Like players love Aphelios, players love Twisted Fate. Like this player, the thing they don't love is that it feels like you play against them all the time. It feels like you can't beat them. But we can fix those things while also allowing the players who love playing them to keep loving them. Right?
No, I agree. I honestly I love your candor in this, man. I love how you're kind of like, you know, saying it how it is and trying to like explain things clearly instead of like dumbing it down. But like I completely agree. There's people in chat that are always, you know, gonna respond to this because they're like, oh well, we don't love TF or Aphelios, but literally it's exactly like you're saying. The back row champion, the back row nature of the champion isn't the problem. There are multiple problems, I think, but it's not an inherent problem of a back row champion. It's the fact that it stops things from attacking. It's the fact that it, you know, some of them are kind of like too high flora value. Like TF and Aphelios, even when you kill them, it feels like, well, they just blue carded, so that's not even, they're not even unhappy. Or Aphelios is like, well, you know, they got their weapon, so they're not even happy. That is also something that I could totally be down with seeing as a problem, but there's nothing inherently wrong with a back row champion, and that's incredibly important to. I love that you clarified that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the problem is if we were to get too designy, really quick, is that both of those cards, both Aphelios and Twisted Fate, and not just them, but the decks they belong in, give too much replacement value to themselves. Like you're saying, even if you kill Twisted Fate right away, well, he still got to cast his card. Like he still got value. He probably, if you had a bunch of, if you were a Spiders deck, he just killed your whole board, even though you killed his Twisted Fate. That sucks. So it's not about them being back row. That's bad. It's, you know, it's the other things they do. It's the value they create. It's the replacement value they have, etc. Yeah, we can address all those things, and we are learning lessons. So future back row champions don't necessarily have those same play patterns. Yeah. They are still back row champions, but they do different things. They attack on different axes.
Yeah. No, that's,
technically Maokai is a back row champion, but, you know, players aren't, like, you're just making saplings, and your saplings are giving you the value. Like Maokai is just sitting there, right? And you're just waiting until you can mill them out with him. And so there are good examples of back row champions. I think, you know, that's not the problem with Twisted Fate or Aphelios.
100%. I love what you pointed out about Azir. I actually wasn't even really thinking about that, honestly, which is kind of rare because usually, I mean, I love design so much. I'm always thinking about like all the angles I can, but I completely miss that. Like, you're right. Azir is like almost unique in that, yeah, he kind of transitions from in Azir's case back row to kind of like front row. Like, he wants to start attacking when he levels up. Aphelios does too, but for his own reasons.
Yeah, different. It's different.
Yeah,
I think, like, just having quick attack means, oh, I can attack, you know. That's not really the same as Azir.
Misfortune is kind of similar, but it is a really cool untapped pattern.
As well. Good call. Yeah, I hadn't thought of her.
That's a great pattern of, like, you know, champions that like take that kind of transition role. That feels really unique.
I mean, I love Misfortune. I think that she's an amazing champion, both in League of Legends, but also in our game.
Yeah.
I mean, she's had her up and downs in our game. That's for sure. But I think she's really fun in our game.
All right, man. I've got one last, at least, like, you know, big question. Although these can kind of branch out, who knows? But so something that, you know, I've been talking about a little bit, as well as I've seen some people sort of like talk about like peripheral things, which is the idea of kind of like the power creep of some of the latest stuff. In particular, it felt like most of the Targon expansion, when I say Targon expansion, I don't mean Targon as a region entirely, but a lot of the cards that came with it, including Targon as a region, felt like, you know, they were at a higher power level than a lot of other things. And I know power creep is a, you know, concern for you guys. I know that, and it's important to understand to a degree it's kind of necessary because you don't want your new stuff launching soft, and you never know exactly how it's going to turn out, right? So it's you want to like lean a little bit towards, you know, the hard stuff, but a lot of people are curious, like, what's the mitigating plan here, right? Like, is there something that, like, okay, so to deal with like inherent power creep, a lot of potential plans would be something like, you know, just making sure that, like, being more aggressive about like balance changings, trying to keep them down in the upcoming like months to like make sure it's all balanced out, or like eventual like rotation kind of system. I don't know if you guys ever do rotations in the future, but like, I mean, how is power creep as a concern?
Good question. Another complicated answer. Dude, this has been an amazing interview. I hope that it's not too boring for people. I know it's not boring for you, but I hope it's not too boring for other people.
I tried to do the sexy stuff kind of closer to the start, and now it's like the more dedicated stuff.
True. Smart, so smart, the smartest swim strim.
I honestly, I completely made that up. That was a random coincidence.
Anyway, so yeah, power creep for us is something we think about, but I think that power creep is a overloaded term. It means a lot of different things to
Yeah.
other people, and it also to different people, and it also is an aggregation of a lot of different concepts. And I think when you talk about power creep in general, um, you start to get lost in the
Yeah.
sauce because like too many it means too many things. So I think that basically I'm going to step back from that term and talk about some lore specific things. So we talked about earlier that like we had a lot of cards in development, future content in development before our game ever released, right? And a goal of our game, especially in the beginning, was to be new player friendly, for our game to be
Yeah.
less complicated than some other card games in our space, because we think that they're so overly complex that it's hard for new players to join the game, right? So and one of our goals was to have a lot of players who love League of Legends, who have never played a card game before, come play Legends of Runeterra. And in order to do that, that means like we got to have, it can't be too hard. There can't be too many things going on. So like I'm going really deep here, sorry. A long time ago in development, our game had activated abilities, which is something other card games have, where it's like you spend mana for your card that's already on the board to do a thing, right? And we ended up taking those out because they add a ton of complexity to the game.
Yeah.
Ton. So it's so much more hard to judge like what's happening in the game. So we knew that's what we wanted our starting point to be. But we also knew we didn't want our ending point to be like to have the complexity be so low.
It makes sense.
So
Launch the game simple and kind of scale it up.
Exactly. So that means that like set 2 Bilgewater, set 3 Targon, set 4 Shurima all get to add a little bit more complexity to them as time goes on, and that trend will continue up to a point. Obviously, we'll stop adding complexity at some point because we don't want to become too complex. Like to be on a mobile phone. Players who play on a mobile phone, it gets too hard when things get too complicated.
Yes.
So anyway, so that means 4 players like you, 4 players who are elite, 4 players who, or not even just elite, but players who want complexity, are complexity seeking. They see us adding complexity and they're like, yo, power creep. But it's not really power creep. It's complexity. And adding that complexity means that we're also adding skill testing elements, because cards that are more complex have different play patterns. They have more complicated play patterns. They have just a more variety of play. Like you can only play Jinx one way, really, right? Because she's very straightforward. But you can play Azir lots of ways. You can play Aphelios lots of ways. Well, maybe he's too strong now. Right now you only play him one way. But the idea is to play him lots of ways, right? And so that adds an element that players who seek complexity, players who seek competitive outcomes and favor winning above all, they see adding complexity as pure power creep, and it's not necessarily true. Like Zed is still a very powerful champion. He's not played a lot right now because Ionia isn't that good. But if you just look at his raw power level, it's still quite high. Like there are a lot of games he can just win on his own.
He's making a comeback.
Exactly. But he is a very straightforward champion. He is very simple. So I would say there is probably a future meta where he will be meta. He could dominate. There's a future meta where Fiora is not a good example because she's complicated. But there's a future meta where Jinx can be one of the most powerful champions and not be complicated. All this is to say that when we add more complexity, it looks like we're adding power creep, but we're not really.
Okay.
So that was the first part of my answer. I know this is a lot of talking. The second part of my answer is that we do want new cards to be exciting. We want new cards to be, to inspire players to want to continue playing, and to have players who have churned for a little while to come back and continue playing. It's very cyclical in card games, as you know, and many of your viewers know. You play for the first little while and then you go away and then you come back for the next thing. That's a very normal play pattern, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. We like that. But we want to inspire players to come back, and if we make cards that don't look inspiring, then less players come back, and that's bad. That's how we get into the world of what you talked about, where games die when we don't do that thing. Exactly. So we have to do that, right? But we also can't make it so that all you play is Shurima. all you play is Targon when it was brand new. Okay, so those 2 points added together for my final point, which is like, we care about power creep. We don't want players to think that new cards are straight up better than old cards. We want old cards to perform as well. But there will be some overlap while we learn, because first of all, we will make mistakes. We'll do things on accident sometimes. And then second of all, we'll just have to explore more design space. We will have to make similar cards in different regions. And I see players talk about this a lot. And I've seen it in your chat a couple times where people are like, yo, Lifeblade versus Stella Corn or whatever, like 2 different cards in 2 different regions that players like, hey, this is a straight upgrade over this other card. Sometimes that is true, but putting it in a different region means it's not exactly a carbon copy. That means it's in a different deck. Hopefully it's in a different deck, right? So as time goes on, okay, wait. So let me button this all up. We care about this issue a lot. We're not ignoring it. We talk about it a lot. Some of it is okay. Some of it is not okay, and it requires nuance to talk about what is okay versus what is not okay. And we don't think about just like pure power creep.
Right.
And then also to your question about like rotation. So we talk about rotation a lot internally. Players talk about it some too. And I want to be clear that just because other games do a thing doesn't mean our game is going to do it. I think we've shown that pretty consistently, that like there are other things that Magic does that we will probably never do. There are some things that Hearthstone does that we will probably never do. And there are things that our game does that they probably will never do.
Yes.
And that's why all of our games can exist in an ecosystem. Our goal isn't to like, destroy Magic or destroy Hearthstone. Just like, I don't think their goal is to destroy us. Our goal, I don't know what their goals are. Our goal is to make the best game we can make and give players the best satisfying experience they can make, or that they can have. And so, if rotation ends up being the solution, then we'll go down that road. But we don't know if that's the only solution, right? Mm-hmm. There are downsides to rotation that players don't talk about a lot, and one of the biggest ones is that like, I think it really sucks if you love playing Yasuo and you love playing Garen or whomever you love from set 1, and then suddenly you can't play him anymore.
Right.
That sucks. We don't want that. We hate that. One of our goals is that players should be able to play the cards they own whenever they want to play them and not feel like punished or stupid for playing them. So, it's a tough problem that we don't necessarily have an answer to yet.
Makes sense. Yeah. No, I really liked that whole explanation. There was a ton of information there. I mean, just to kind of like add on, I mean, the complexity creep effectively as it is, which is not a bad thing. It's, very natural, kind of like leads to a wider margin of error, right, for you guys, because it just makes it like when things are more complex, it's obviously a lot harder to, exactly predict how things are going to go. And it makes sense that some things will end up being kind of like, over-tuned with specific interactions. I think specifically, I wanted to, use Leblanc as an example of this, because I think a lot of people are like, so, when Leblanc got revealed, a lot of people didn't love Leblanc, and I think there's a couple of reasons why, but honestly, the biggest one that I don't think a lot of people were really even necessarily cognizantly aware of was the fact that it was because the rest of the Empires of the Ascended expansion did a really good job with upping the complexity. Like when we look at these champions here, I'll pull it up on screen. When we look at these, the new cards and the new champions, of Empires of the Ascended, on average, we have a ton of like designs that we just wouldn't see in, set 1, right? Like
Absolutely.
Renekton is pretty complex. Talia is pretty complex. There's like, Lysandra is doing a completely unique mechanic. Kindred's very complex. And this is like, a very, very, very different field from set 1. And that's, I think, a lot of why people latched onto Leblanc. Not that there aren't other reasons, but Leblanc just kind of like came out of nowhere after all that as like a super simple. She feels kind of like a set 1 champion. People are pointing out that, of course, with Leblanc, she feels kind of anti-flavorful. And that's, I think to a degree, that's definitely true. And there could be something changed there. Maybe I'll ask you about that in a second. But I guess the bigger thing is like, I mean, when you compare her to like Zed, I mean, Zed is also a sort of similar thing where, I mean, you know, he's super complex in League, and LoR isn't really encapsulating that perfectly, and that's just because Zed is a set one champion. A lot of set one champions, people kind of forget, a lot of set one champions when the game launched in Foundations, they're pretty simple. And that was intentional on Riot's part. And so just like looking at this, you know, the new Shurima, looking at all this like higher degree of complexity, and then seeing LeBlanc as what is effectively, I mean, she looks like a set one champion by those standards, just feels really out of place. And that's what I think a lot of people were responding to, which again, is not to say that something shouldn't be done about LeBlanc, which brings me to my next question. What do you guys think about LeBlanc?
I love her. So I love the way you're thinking about it, and it's very similar to the way we think about it. And I also love the connection you drew between like the league counterpart from these champions, which is also something we very proactively try to make the champion feel like the League of Legends champion.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of different ways to do that. Like for Zed as an example, he's one of the most complicated champions in League of Legends. We didn't want him to be in our game. And so we relied more on flavor and like his ability to kill you quickly, which are things that he does very well in League of Legends, as well as being complicated. Whereas like in our game, the way we executed that is like, if you don't block him the first turn, you probably lost. Like if he levels up if you play him on 3 and then he gets to level up, the game is over probably, right? It means you might not die right away, but you're gonna die eventually. So anyway, the way, and so we think that is good from like Foundations, like you said, to make simple champions. We think that it is also important to make straightforward champions in every set release, especially when a new region comes out.
Yep.
Because not every player is complexity seeking. Not every player is elite and knows every card. And when they join, and also not every player is a veteran. Like every time we release new content, new players join our game, which is good for the health of our game. And we want to give those players content that they can easily understand and easily battle with right away without needing 50 hours of gameplay to understand. And so it is a literal goal we talk about that I push across the team, that like when we release content, we have to release content for all players, not just complex seeking players or whatever. And so yes, LeBlanc is one of our avenues of like, yep, she's straightforward, but that doesn't mean she's not powerful. She's still a 5 attack quick strike unit for 3, which is still very powerful. I mean, that's like old Draven basically without needing to cast the axe. I mean, she's a 5-2, I guess, not a 5-3. Yeah, so that is why there are going to be cards like that basically forever. We're always going to make some number of cards that are straightforward. But we hope are not. That doesn't mean they don't get played. They might not get played by the players who actively want complex cards, but they will get played by the players who are new or just want straightforward cards. So that's one access. Then you ask, how do I feel about LeBlanc? I love LeBlanc. I think that LeBlanc is cool in our game, and I know that some players, there was a lot of pushback about how she doesn't feel like LeBlanc. And I don't think that's a fair assessment, honestly. I mean, like it's hard for me to say. I don't make Reddit posts about that because I think that it'll come off tone deaf. But in this conversation, I can say that like there are a lot of things about her that feel very much like LeBlanc to me.
So you say you don't want to make a Reddit post because, I mean, it's all about context and tone, but unfortunately this is going to get clipped and put on Reddit, so you know.
That's fine. So I'm about to give context to what I mean. So like, first of all, when we evaluate how does a champion feel in our game, it is primarily about the champion card itself, but it's about all the cards. And if you look at the LeBlanc suite of cards, her actual champion card is very straightforward. But many of the cards that belong with her are some of the most complicated cards we have ever made. Black Rose Spy is an extremely complicated card. Mimic is an extremely complicated card. They feel like LeBlanc to me.
Okay.
And then also, this is my greater point of like, if somebody clips something, this is why I think LeBlanc feels like LeBlanc to me. LeBlanc, this is what LeBlanc does in League of Legends. For those of you who don't play League of Legends, she shows up in your lane. You don't know that she was coming. She blinks on top of you. You die. She blinks away. That is what she does in League of Legends. She's an assassin that shows up, does a ton of damage, and gets the fuck out. That when I think about what does that look like in a card game, I think high power, quick a strike, low cost, like trying to just like evaporate your opponent by attacking as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you paired her with something that lets you attack every turn or whatever, then you're like constantly attacking for 5 with quick attack, which makes it really hard for your opponent to block. She feels like LeBlanc to me in that way. That's not to say players are wrong. Obviously, players want her to be this super deceptive, clone-driven thing, but I think that a lot of those players haven't been evaporated by LeBlanc in League of Legends, and they're looking at a very narrow slice.
Right.
And we did try to play up on that with like her level up. Like in her level up, she says like, "I am everyone, I am everywhere," and also in her level up, you see like in her level 1 illustration, there's a bunch of people sitting around a table, but in her level 2 illustration, you see that she's actually all of those people. She's pretending to be all of those people, and so there are ways that we tried to bring that element of LeBlanc into the game that I think are awesome and flavorful that don't have to always be gameplay.
Yeah.
That's my answer about LeBlanc.
And that it makes a lot of sense. So I'm personally, I don't have a stake in this one. I have, I'm neutral. I don't really know LeBlanc from League because I'm not really, a League player. And there's a bit of a divide because a lot of players like her and a lot of players feel like she should be different, as you mentioned. But yep. The trick of it and the reason it's so hard is because it's straight up adaptation, right? And I think a lot of people like sort of forget that because it's not a translation. It's like, when a piece of written work like a novel gets turned into like a movie, a lot of things have to change because those mediums or media are just very fundamentally different things. And so like the adaptation process is pretty tricky, and that's what you guys have to deal with when you go from like League to a card game. It's not in almost in a couple of cases, just based on like a mechanical coincidence, there could be a champion that will occasionally translate very well in a direct fashion. But in most cases, the translations will end up being like really tricky, and you do the best with what you can. Like I was playing Azir yesterday because I was playing League of Legends, and Azir, my chat bullied me into playing Azir even though I've played League for like 2 days.
Holy moly.
Yeah, didn't have a good time, but honestly, I didn't mind it.
Super hard.
He's super well designed, and someone was saying like, Swim, Azir feels kind of like he didn't get translated very well. But that's like, again, it's hard to imagine like what Azir could have looked like, because Azir is another one sort of similar to LeBlanc where I could see trying to translate a higher degree of complexity. But as far as like what he does in League mechanically and how that can be translated into a functional card that makes sense in the game and like represents the entire archetype as a whole, I don't think Azir is like a bad job at doing that. It's like, so I think a lot of people just forget the nature of adaptation. It's because everyone sees adaptation from such like a different angle. It's kind of inherently impossible to satisfy everyone. Like adaptation is really, really hard.
Absolutely true. I could not agree with you more that it's an adaptation and gets tough. And when you're taking something that someone loves and you're representing it in a new way, everyone's going to love different things about that. Different people love different things about LeBlanc or different things about Azir. Yep. And we spend a lot of research time asking League of Legends players what they think are the most, like whenever we make a champion in our game, we do a bunch of research with like League of Legends players to say like what are the most important factors, what makes this champion special, what makes them feel like themselves to you, and then we try to take that information and incorporate it in our game. Yeah. And so very literally with LeBlanc, a lot of players were like, huge damage, assassin, comes out of nowhere and kills you. Those are things that players like, that's what LeBlanc feels like to me. Obviously, there are other players who are like, I feel like she feels like deception and feels like,
exactly,
has all this lore. I get it. That we have to make a choice. Like, which direction are we picking? Very few options, like you called out. Very few times are we able to just like slam it, and the champion means the same thing to everyone. That's very rare, right? Yeah. So we're doing our best, and I think that we did. I know that some people were unhappy with LeBlanc, but I'm proud of her. I think that she does feel like League of Legends to me. I actually have a little bit of a suspicion that some of the keyboard warriors out there don't actually play LeBlanc in League of Legends, and they're claiming to care about a thing that they don't actually care about. Because also something we know from League of Legends is that LeBlanc's play rate is very low. Her popularity is very low. And so, like, you know, suddenly there's all these people who suddenly care about LeBlanc. I'm like, questionable. Where are you at in League of Legends? Why aren't you playing her in League of Legends?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that makes
like
sense.
Azir's play rate is very high, and
Yeah.
so, you know, players have very specific, like, you know, literal tens of millions of players play those champions every day, and they have a very strong emotional connection to those champions. Not to say that people playing LeBlanc don't have strong emotional connections. I believe that they do. It's just, it makes it harder because, like, we have to execute. There's so many assassins in League of Legends, and we have to execute them differently. We can't make every assassin feel the same in our game. That would be boring.
Yeah.
So anyway,
No,
I don't know if I gave
that's
the
a great
answer you were looking
answer.
for.
That's
Okay,
no,
good.
absolutely. I love the, you know, man, you say things how they are, you know, you're real with it. And I really appreciate that. Cause I mean, I know it's really hard, you know, when you're in a position where it feels like, you know, there's some things that maybe you shouldn't say or something, but like I don't know. I really appreciate the, like, the level of, I guess, just like, yeah, just transparency and respect. Just like, it's always hard when you say something that, like, could be taken in a negative light. It's just like, you have to sort of, like, trust that, like, the people listening are gonna understand properly and not just react viscerally. And, like, you've got that nailed down, man. Like, it's actually been really, really nice and really, really clarifying for me, and I think everyone else, actually.
Thanks, dude. I appreciate it. I want to be clear that I think most people at Riot and everyone on the Legends of Runeterra team feels the same way. We want to be as transparent as we can. We want to tell you all everything we can.
Yeah.
There's just a little bit of a struggle where, like, it's somewhat easier for you and I to talk about this thing in a conversation than it is for me to, like, make a Reddit post or make a tweet, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, you'll have follow-up questions, and in this conversation I can answer them, but in those posts I can't.
Maybe that's the answer then. Maybe we should do this more
totally
often.
maybe. I mean, I think that and there's also potentially an outcome where people on our team who are watching this or review it later and they're like, yo, what the fuck, you can't say that, you know, like, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm safe. I'm pretty sure I haven't done anything like that before, but, like, there have been times where, like, we overshare.
Yeah.
And when I say overshare, it's not because we want to keep it a secret. It's just like, if I say something the wrong way, then I'm misleading players and telling them something that isn't true. Obviously, we don't want to do that. We never want to mislead anyone. So it's like, it can be hard. It's to your point of, like, let's do this more often. Like, I'm down, and I think that more people on our team are down for that too. Like, if players like this, if players want more of this, then fuck yeah, we want to do what players want. That's what we want to do. We want to make the game that everyone wants. Not just, like, make some game in an ivory tower and be like, why don't you like our thing? That's what happens to. That's when games die. Right?
100%. I think, I mean, it's really just, like, pretty much every like issue that people have been complaining about. I mean, you know how it is. It's not just game design. It's kind of everything, because, like, everything happens for so many reasons, right? There's never, like, one reason for anything. It's like I was talking about Leblanc, like, a large part of the reason people were dissatisfied was because of the juxtaposition of complexity with, you know, what people expected, right? That's really, like, a lot of the core of what was happening there. And I think a similar thing is happening, like, recently. I mean, sure, there are issues and there are short-term issues, but me and at least a good amount of people, my bigger problem hasn't been because of any sort of, like, lack of a single balanced patch or any sort of, like, short-term thing. I've just been, you know, because there hasn't been a lot of communication in the last, like, month or two for whatever reason, I've just been concerned, right? Because those signs concern me, and that's it. Like, I think, like, so much of, you know, what people are, you know, complaining about just goes away as long as they have assurances that, oh, you know, we realize this is an issue, that, you know, the balance approach will get, you know, fundamentally shifted in some kind of, like, fairly major way in, you know, down the road, right? That will address this, like, issue for the future, right? You know, you're long-term oriented. It's all the right approach. And yeah,
I appreciate that 100%. And honestly, hearing you say that in your stream a few days ago is what started us down this path of, like, let's talk about it, because we don't want that feeling. That feeling is the opposite of what we want. We want everyone to know and trust that we are doing everything we can to give players what they want and to communicate as much as we can. And we want that thing. So totally, when the community feels this thing and you call it out, I'm like, whoa, Let's talk about it. So that's sick. I also really quickly, kind of a sidebar, I see like some Reddit posts where people are saying that I'm hinting that the Void is not our next
Oh God,
expansion.
they're starting already.
I'm not hinting that. I want to make it clear that I'm saying that if we choose that path, it's a tough path, and it's not going to look like what players' expectations are. Every player has a different expectation, and so like if we chose that path, there's not a lot of champions, and so we would have to do something to like build out an experience that makes sense. I'm not saying whether we are or are not doing that. That's it. Jesus.
I mean, to me, just as a neutral observer here, the fact that Dovagedys is clarifying it again kind of hints that it is Void, don't you think? Like,
Jesus Christ. Okay. Your role in the community, if you want to start, let me get off the call if you're going to start making wild claims, because I can't put me in a position where I can't defend myself.
I'm not gonna say that. I just couldn't help myself, man. We don't know, guys. We don't know. It's all up in the air. What is Void?
I will say that I think is spicy, but is also not a secret, is that there are hints out there about what it is. We have purposely put hints out there about what the 10th region is, and to my knowledge, the biggest hint no player has ever found yet. I haven't seen it on Reddit, I haven't seen it in a tweet or whatever. So the truth is out there, As old people used to say.
Ooh.
So there you go. There's some spicy shit.
I know there's a bunch of like purple tentacles and like Xenotype researcher art and like a couple of the arts, but I'm guessing that's not the biggest hint. Yeah. Ooh, interesting.
Anyway,
well,
I hope that now that is an example of something I could get scolded.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like a maybe, but nah, that's good, man.
I think I'm fine.
I think the Reddit detectives will be on the case now.
I mean, so the reason I feel comfortable saying that is like I feel like the Reddit detectives have been on the case for over a year and they still haven't found it. So that's why I'm safe saying like
a call out. That's a challenge. Yeah. You got to be careful.
So anyway, so just to call it out, like we're almost 30 minutes over, which I'm okay with, but I want to be cognizant of your time and make sure that you have any other questions or whatever we're answering.
That was pretty much I think the wrap up for me. I'm super happy about this. We'll have to, I'll send you a message and we'll see if I don't know if this could be a thing in the future, but I don't think it would have to I don't know. I don't think it would have to be like common at all. Just once every like month or two would be really great. Because I mean honestly, like, hey man, like no dick suck, but Dovagedys, like honestly, no, seriously, I think you're like really perfect for this kind of thing. Because like you're kind of like core to the team, like you're a producer, but like you're one of the producers that like is really invested in like the kind of like card game elements. You're good at kind of like clarifying all of the issues. Like this really has been, I think, really helpful for a lot of people in the community.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Like, seriously.
I'm excited about it. I think that if we keep doing something like this, which I think is a good idea, I think it would be more fun if we rotate people. Like I think doing it with just me could get pretty boring pretty quickly. Let's get
let's get more of the team.
There are a lot of people on the Legends of Runeterra team that most of the community have never heard from.
Absolutely.
Like most people know like Steve Rubin, right? But like there are a lot of people who care about balance on our game. There's a lot of people who work on that. Steve is the design lead, but he is quick to tell everyone and has tweeted multiple times, he doesn't just make decisions on his own. It's like a team of people. And so I think it could be cool if we have something like this where we have multiple people doing it with multiple streamers. Sorry, buddy, not just you, but like
no, of course, not just me.
Because there are
community
streamers in Brazil
developer
and there are streamers
interactions
in Korea and stuff, and I think it would be awesome if we did more stuff like this.
Yeah, 1,000%. Like some kind of, I mean, there's so many things like the little like so many games have these like little dev series. Sometimes they're like podcasts, sometimes they invite like people in the community, sometimes they're just like weekly developer updates. But I never see people unhappy about those systems. Just like, and you can do it like. You were worried that things might get like a little bit repetitive if it's like weekly, and I'm with you on that, but you could do it. I mean, obviously spitballing, there's so many examples, but if like at a higher frequency, you could like have kind of like change ups, like you could, have at certain points, it could be about like, the more art things of the game or like hidden things or as you mentioned, like anyone on the dev team, right? So there's so many different ways to kind of like, split it up. And,
totally. I mean, we could even do something like with some of the narrative people where you can ask that question about the Watcher, and
Yeah.
they might know the answer to the question because they wrote the story.
Yeah,
you
that'd be
know?
perfect.
That would be sick. So this is a great idea. And so we'll talk about it more off your stream to like figure out what the future looks like.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Sounds perfect. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, dude, this was super fun. I loved it so much. So I'm excited to do it more. I'm excited for more people to do it.
Yep. All right, guys. Yeah, that's I guess that concludes this interview. Hey, man, I honestly, like, I've got most of the social things down, but I'm really bad at kind of like ending conversations because I get really awkward. I'm actually famous for this on my stream because it's impossible for me to have a call. And now it's just like I'm painted into a corner. But
You're not. I appreciate your candidness, and I think that everybody has that. So don't be too hard on yourself.
All right, man.
We'll end the call now. This was super
All
fun.
right.
And we'll talk more offline about what the future looks like. Thanks for having me.
Sounds good, man. This was great. Have a nice day.
You too, buddy. See ya.
I think I nailed that last one. It's just keep it short, keep it simple. Sounds good, man. This was great. Have a nice day. It's just like, God, that's always so hard for me, guys. I don't know what it is. I've learned most aspects of doing things socially, but I just the finisher. I do it decently, not even super well, but I'm going well, and then just at the end of it all, you do it in Discord too, you weirdo. Yeah, Noise can confirm. All right, but yeah, no, this was actually this was super cool. I actually liked pretty much everything that I heard. It's all good news. We'll see exactly like what happens in the balance patches and stuff like that. I mean, who like we're gonna get a lot of information in like 3 or 4 days because we're gonna get the balance patch as well as like the labs, and that'll we'll see how things are looking then. I do hope that they're gonna augment Shurima in a couple of ways and give us a sweet new lab of legends. And I think a lot of it just comes down to like them getting down this eventual cadence. The thing is, it's just about like long term versus short term. As long as Riot as a company isn't interested in lowering their commitment on this project, and as long as they're being adaptive and learning from, as Dovagedys put it, their mistakes, that's kind of the only thing that matters. That's my angle here. Like, I'm not trying to be like overly positive. I'm trying to be like neutral in all this. And I mean, there are definitely like flaws, but literally the reason why I'm happy with the insight we got there is because that's all that matters. Like, if they aren't interested in like, lowering funding for the project, and if they're learning from their mistakes, that's great. That's all I need. Literally. Like, I'm not just saying that, I promise.